No, that's the sales team, the
Oh.
broadcasters are on the outside.
They would
so
look
they're
outside,
looking-
yeah.
Yeah, they're looking outside. Okay. That case is working, we're just waiting for more. Keeping me in check.
Are you recording now?
Gets the whole front of the room, nobody's in it, don't worry, anybody outside. Nobody's in it except Eddie. I'm like, I think too many people have.
So you live right in Halifax or?
Sackville?
Okay, yeah.
Outside, actually a little past Sackville, it's a new neighborhood called Indigo Shores.
Okay.
So it's all acreages, but it's as if you were heading toward the valley. On one side of the road is Sackville, and we're on the opposite side of the highway, and you're heading down. Yeah, it's a beautiful spot.
I can't remember where one of my roads are. Stuff in
Okay.
It's like, it's a nice, really nice
Yeah,
area, all in the woods.
yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah.
They've got, every house has about 2.5 acres,
Yeah.
which is nice, you know, and we have, like every animal you can imagine. In fact, we had a bear in our backyard the other day, and the bear was like this big. It's just, it's level with the green bin, but it looks, so I have chains holding the lint on the green bin. But I went out one day and he was dragging the whole green bin into the woods. And he looked at me as if to say, I got something back at the shop, can get this cover off. I just gotta take it home with me.
So yeah, you're probably pretty close to it.
Yeah.
He's right where the little lake is.
Okay, yeah. And he's by Sackville?
Yeah, well, I have one in Sackville, lower Sackville.
Right.
And then one that's when you're coming from Truro.
Right.
It's like right before the turn off to go to Sackville.
Oh, okay.
Little lake there.
Oh, yes, okay. Like Fall River area.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Oh, river, yeah, Fall River.
Yes.
That's a beautiful spot. I used to have a motorcycle, and there's a Tim Hortons that we all used to go to and have coffee, but the fall, like this time of year, the drive along there is stunning. It's nice living in Halifax, you know, and, I mean, I love Cape Breton, but I couldn't do what I do living in Cape Breton. I do 100 flights a year, so it's, you know, it's an international airport, it's easy access.
Well, if I ever retire, probably be somewhere near my two brothers.
Yeah. It's funny, you talk to people who are out here, and they all say that when I retire, you know, a lot of them want to go back home. Well, my wife and I, we moved to Alberta a couple times. We lived close to the mountains, so we really enjoyed it. And then, just before the pandemic, my father got poorly ill, so we got moved home. But we're at a place now, we have a grandchild, and there's nowhere else in the world we live there. We kind of have to be.
I don't know where my husband is.
Is he from here? Yeah, that's for sure.
He likes it.
When we moved my daughter out to Calgary, and her boyfriend, and they broke up. They were gonna get married actually, we were planning a wedding and they broke up. We were glad, we didn't like it, but so, it ended up, she fell in love with somebody from Halifax, and they both moved back home. So it worked out really good that, you know, the whole family kind of stayed together. And once you start dividing up the siblings like that, it's hard.
We're the reason, Brittany's the reason. We'll see, we might do it after this. We're waiting for. But I think in the interest of time, good morning. What do you think, Eddie?
Whatever, it's your show, I'm just hired help.
It's 9:06. Okay, well, and I'm assuming. So welcome everyone this morning. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm Carla from the Chamber, and we are thrilled to be hosting the one and only Eddie LeMoine here this morning. So the reason we are hosting this session is when we surveyed our members about what your current challenges are, overwhelmingly, the number one answer is people. Where are they? Where can we find staff? And when we get staff, how do we keep them? So here we are today. Eddie is going to talk to you. This is going to be fun. You're going to laugh. It's going to give you some more information that you might not have thought about, but ideas, and just to explain the why, and some ideas on how to solve or overcome those challenges. So thank you for joining us this morning. Before Eddie starts, we'll do a safety check. In the event of a fire or disaster, muster point is going to be in the parking lot to the south of the building. We will go down the stairs, exit through the alley, and then go to the parking lot. Washrooms are directly out this door. If you head down the hallway, hang a right, and then you're going to hang a sharp left for men's and women's washrooms down there. Come and go as you please. There's coffee at the back and water in the mini fridge and juice boxes, all kinds of stuff for anybody that needs. And without further ado, I'll let Eddie introduce himself.
Okay, awesome, thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us.
Any questions? So today's gonna be light. I mean, the topic is heavy, like what's happening in the job market in Canada is heavy, but you're not gonna do anything that's gonna make you feel uncomfortable. I might get you to do a couple exercises together where you'll have some discussion, but you're not gonna bark like a dog or cluck like a chicken or do any silly activities, but it's a really interesting topic when we start to dig into it. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I have this tickle in my throat, and I'm just hoping it will go away. And I think it's from the hotel room. It's the dryness of the hotel room. So my background, so as a professional speaker, I've been doing this since 2005. So I'm about 20 years on the speaking circuit. I do about 75 to 100 keynotes a year. I speak in every industry you can possibly think of. There's not an industry that I haven't touched, straight down from the agriculture, fisheries to undertakers. There's not a group that I haven't had the privilege of standing in front of. My background, I'm from Eastern Canada. You'll probably pick it up in my accent as the day goes on. There's like 4 billionaire families on the East Coast. I work for 3 of them. So I worked for the Irving organization, which was an oil and gas company. I worked in what they call the green side, the JDI side. Ran a technology company for them. We grew to about $1 billion. There's another gentleman on the East Coast called Ken Rowe. He owned a company called IP Aerospace. I worked for them. You might remember we launched an airline called CanJet to compete against WestJet at the time. Big company. They get the fingers in all kinds of different stuff. And then I worked for another very quiet gentleman by the name of Joe Shannon. He owned a company called Atlantic Corporation. But in Nova Scotia, next to the province, they're the largest provider of healthcare in the province, and just a massive company. They own more, planes and trucks, and they own a Harmac Trucking in Ontario, Seaboard Liquid Carriers. You'll see them driving up and down the highways here. So a couple of really big companies. I do this session, and this kind of reminds me of, I do a session that we were chatting about last night called TEC. It stands for the Executive Committee. They're actually CEO groups. We get together in basically a room about this size, and we discuss what's happening in their companies. So you'll learn a lot about me as we go through the morning. The labor market, this is a big deal, and it is not going away. That's the one thing, I can kind of assure you. I'll give you a little bit of an insight of what the morning's gonna look like, then I'm not gonna ask you a couple questions, but we're gonna look at the trends in the employment sector, and I'll kind of get rid of all the myths, what's really happening in the employment sector, what's not. I'll answer that question, where did everybody go, because that is something that, people wanna know. This is only a few people in the room will know what this is, but this is a very technical Atlantic Canadian term. I'm literally gonna scare the bejeebers out of you. And the reason why I'm doing that is I believe that we have to change the way we do things. I think we have to change the way we manage people, we have to change the way we attract and retain people. And I believe by scaring the bejeebers out of you, if I got nothing else out of the morning, if we simply walked out at the end of the day and you said, okay, the way I'm doing it's not gonna work in the future, I gotta reevaluate the way I'm doing things. So that would be a success for me. We'll look at how to engage people and how to build capacity, and this is a word you're gonna hear a lot. Even if a company is financing you or a bank is financing you, the bankers are gonna say, how are you gonna do it? Like, how are you gonna build that capacity? And I'll give you an example. I'm in Calgary and I have a group of executives around the table, and we're going around the table and I said, what's kind of keeping you awake? And this one CEO says, when we win a piece of business now, we're not even sure if we can deliver it anymore. They said one time we won a piece of business, we ran around the room and we rang a bell and celebrated. And they said now we win a piece of business and we slide it under the deck and hope our employees don't realize we have to work them that much harder. So capacity is going to be a big thing. Like, how do you build that capacity? And how do you build that capacity with a dwindling workforce? So where does artificial intelligence and technology and all those things kind of fit into your future? How do you get more productivity out of your team? We'll look at reasons why people join, stay, and leave. The reason why people are leaving in 2024 are very, very different than why they were leaving in 2019. So, and the younger your workforce, the more likely it's going to be different. So we'll chat about that. We'll look at some successful attributes of leadership. And then over lunch, we're gonna do something. Oh, and this part here, in closing the engagement gap, we're actually gonna tackle 5 generations in the workplace. I think if the pandemic hadn't come along, 5 generations in the workplace would be probably the biggest disruptor we have. I'm 62 years old. If I'm gonna have a conversation with someone that's 22, I may as well talk to a squirrel. And it's not because the 22-year-old's a squirrel, it's because their communication style is just so different than mine. I was telling Carla that I have power of attorney over my 89-year-old mother, and it requires me to have a conversation with her every single day. And what's interesting with my mother, it's FaceTime, and it's a 25-minute commitment. My 29-year-old son, if I FaceTime him, he would think I was taking a heart attack. So I text him, and I get literally 2 responses, and then it goes to DEFCON level 4, and I don't hear from him for 3 days. He goes like, Dad, I gave you all the information I'm gonna give you at this point. So in our companies, in our places of employment, the way we communicate with people across the generations has to reflect the way they wanna hear that message as well. So it's a big deal. And then at lunch, we're gonna do something special. So in addition to all this work I do on this really, really heavy topic around labor market and skill shortage, I actually wrote a book a few years back called Bring About What You Think About, which is an inspirational book that I literally live my life by. While you're eating, I'm gonna share with you some highlights from the book. It literally can be life-changing for you. Last weekend we did a CEO retreat in Halifax where we had a group of about 15 CEOs and their spouses attend. We do a half-day session on the book, and it helps people set goals. The timing is perfect. You're heading in the end of 2024, you're thinking about what do you want to do in 2025. I'll be able to help you set some goals in 2025 that will stick. And these goals don't have to be work related. They can, you can set a goal around your health, around finance, personal relationships, career, really doesn't matter. But it's a really interesting look at how we set goals, and it's quite inspirational actually, and it's moving as well. So it's a kind of a nice, after I depress you about the labor market and all the things that are going on, I'll kind of send you out at the end of the day, and you'll get some value. I would like you to be present. To try and get as much out of today, try and get as much of the day as you possibly can, because it's 3 hours together. You know, we were talking about this last night. If you have a rock star employee in your organization and you're paying them, let's pick a number, you're paying them $50,000 a year to work for you. If we can save that person from leaving you, I'm gonna save you $150,000. So you might wanna just really kind of dig in, and even for your own careers, like really try and get the absolute most out of the morning that you possibly can. So what I'd like to do, we're gonna go around the table. I want you to introduce yourself, because it is a bit of a networking event, you have the opportunity to meet each other. Introduce yourself, the company that you work for, and then tell me your feeling that what you're seeing around employee attraction retention. Are you struggling to find people? Are people leaving, or are they staying, or so on? So, I mean, we're gonna start with you, but you may not.
Sure. I'm Heidi with the Chamber of Commerce. For us, Carla's leaving.
There.
But it's because she's retiring. But I find that the reason why I've stuck with the Chamber is because Carla is a mentor to me, and our board is fantastic. They do flex time, they work with me. I'm a single mom with 2 kids, so if I have to work from home, Carla's always, that's no problem at all, put your sign up. So it's really nice when they work with you, and they make me feel valued, so I'm sticking in for the long haul.
Perfect, awesome.
I'm Noelle, and I work at Tri-Waste Disposal. At the moment, we are actually doing really well with keeping our employees. We have a great team. We all work well together, and I'm pretty happy with what's happening currently. So.
Great.
My name is Arjun. I am working as an employment advisor in Southwest Newcomer Welcome Center. In our organization also, some employees leave because they find better job opportunities with respect to future. So,
Okay, perfect.
Hi, my name is Judy. I'm a settlement worker for career employment at the Southwest Newcomer Welcome Center. And we do help newcomers settle into the community, and we help them with their employment placements. And yeah, there are a lot of newcomers who are looking for employment, and we are passionate about helping them get into the community and get the proper placement.
So do you work with temporary foreign workers as well, or?
He does, we
Okay.
do also,
Okay.
and mostly in my case, is the permanent residents.
Okay,
Yeah.
because the temporary foreign worker program changing is gonna have a
That's true,
significant
yes.
impact on.
Yes.
I was speaking at one of the big fast food chains next month in British Columbia, and they're petrified of the new rules around temporary foreign workers, because it's gonna have a huge impact on it, for sure.
Exactly, yeah.
My name is Brittany. I'm the assistant director at the Swift Child Care Center. We actually have pretty great retention in comparison to some other centers within the field. It's kind of seems to be a little bit of transient work sometimes. So I think just looking forward to learning some ways to kind of reward the people that we do have on board and move forward with that.
And your industry is struggling to find people and keep people, and especially with $10 a day daycare. You know, I think when you think of $10 a day daycare, it was never about making it affordable for people to have daycare. It's, you know, the real push with $10 a day daycare is that people get back to work. You know, and some parts of the country, you know, I live in just outside of Halifax. My daughter lived in the area that had the forest fires, and in daycare centers, the 3 in her neighborhood burned down during the forest fire. And the waiting list for daycare for her is about 4 years long. So there's absolutely no chance of her getting daycare in that region, so.
My name's Anna. I'm the director of Swift Child Care Center. As Brittany mentioned, we have fairly good retention. We have a good group of people right now. With a mainly workforce full of women, we have a lot of maternity leaves to fill and those types of things. And we just recently got some new spaces, so we'll be expanding. So we will have to look for some new faces here in the future.
Awesome. Great.
Good morning, my name is Dina, and I'm the Executive Director of the Southwest Newcomer Welcome Center. And just like what Arjun and Duby mentioned, we help with newcomer placements. It's just that when I talked with Carla, she mentioned that the problem is the people I told her, we have the people, but they are not being hired. What's the problem?
Yeah,
So we have to find that gap between the employers, what are they looking for versus like what the employees are looking for.
Yeah. And there are a couple gaps, like Z generation, like kids entering the workforce. 17% jobless rate in that market right now. So there are pockets. When you like, I look at it from a more of a macro level. What's it look like in Canada? What's the job market look like in the country? But there are pockets of high unemployment in certain sectors. And one of the ones we are finding, and part of it is because of the temporary foreign worker program. The temporary foreign worker program took a lot of jobs that would have normally been given to other folks. So we have to find this balance. We're walking this line between, immigration, housing, young people entering the workforce, baby boomers exiting the workforce. We're walking a very tight rope right now, and we're not going to figure it out today, but I will kind of show you all of the different things that are happening. Everything from the temporary foreign worker program, the young people entering the workforce, to people exiting, and what the numbers look like when we look at that.
Okay, I'm Leon Totler-Weeb, and I'm owner and manager at Bumper to Bumper. We've got one guy who has been with the business 51 years now, so we've been in business for 71 years. So he's 70 years old. He stepped back to 4 days a week this year, which caused massive confusion. January, he wants to go back to 3 days a week. So he has the job my husband wants, who owns the business, isn't going to get because he's doing it and he laughs because it's funny. On the other spectrum, we hired, what do you call them, Gen Zs? He's still trying to figure out what he wants to be when he grows up. He's an excellent employee, he does fantastic work, but he wants to be a fireman now. So it's taken him a while to find out if he wants to be a fireman. On the other hand, we just got approval to hire foreign workers. So we're one of those businesses that are competing with Subway. And we hired Dan, and he is one of the nicest, smartest guys you're ever going to meet. He has been in Swift Current for 3 years, still hadn't been sent for, or the company hadn't applied for him to have his permanent workers. So he was working part-time for us, so he's working 12 days a week, working for us, and he fit in, he's learning, and we're an automotive business, it's not easy to learn.
Yeah.
And he's like, he could have gone into pharmacy and engineering, so he's learning car parts. He fit in really well, so when Dawn stepped back, we're like, okay, Dan, let's have a plan here, would you like to come and work for us? So we applied to be able to do this for him. Even though he's been at Swift Current and has worked I don't know how many hundreds of hours, he still didn't have his 700 hours worth of business behind him to say, okay, let's do this with you. So now he's counting down the hours, working just for us, not 2 jobs. And I have to say, his dream has been to go to Banff.
Really?
That's his dream, is to have time off, to be able to do something. He went to Banff last weekend.
Oh, nice.
He has a life, and he is so happy, and he's flourishing.
Nice.
So it's like, who else do you know, Dan? Cause like, there's somebody else.
You know us.
So just in Dina's question there, why aren't they being hired? Some of the positions are specific. We need service writers, we need mechanics, we need things like that. Working at the counter, it's the barrier to that English language. So many jobs you have to be able to communicate, and that's where we're finding why I interviewed lots and lots of people, and if I can't understand them, I know my customers can't understand them, even though I'm a baby boomer and have a little bit of problem with picking up the accent, but I do eventually.
Yeah.
But that's a big one when you're hiring people.
It is.
Great. Carla?
I'm Carla Weens, and I'm currently CEO of our local chamber, but I also have a farming operation and I teach in the winter, so I'm just retiring from the chamber. What I have discovered, and we don't hire a lot at the chamber right now, it's Heidi and I are a 2-woman team, plus our board, but I do know in talking with our members, it is, as a baby boomer, it is very interesting how how to communicate and deal, well, not deal with, or how, and interact with different generations. So that is very key, because I know, even my mother's age group, people think that the work ethic has changed, so what is valuable for this next generation has changed. It's for people of my age demographic to learn what's important to someone of Heidi's age or Denise. It's different.
Not that far from you.
Well, probably so, yeah, but I think it will help employers learn how to relate better to their staff, which might foster different thinking. When we went to school, it was that I don't think there's such thing as a career anymore.
No, you graduate and get out of the house.
You got out of the house, you chose one thing to do, did that for 30 years, and then played golf or whatever it happens to be. Things have changed and will continue changing. So.
Denise Wall, I'm Business Development and Tourism Officer for the City of LeCurrent. So I am out there talking to, I've got to some of the businesses so far. I've been in the position just over a year, so I'm working my way through it. But yeah, overwhelmingly, that's been kind of the theme and prior to that, I was selling marketing for Golden West, and same thing, again, I was doing businesses, and so that was the overwhelming theme. So yeah, that's why I'm here to kind of glean some information and, maybe pass it on to the businesses that I work with so that I can help them, retain and expand. That's the goal for the city, so.
It's interesting, every province runs different sets of ads that, kind of recruit people. Alberta runs fantastic ads to recruit talent. Like they've been doing it for years, they know how to do it. Their ads, we'll find you a job, we'll find your spouse a job, we'll get your dog a job, whoever wants a job, just come to Alberta. Nova Scotia ran fantastic ads this year on getting boomers to come back and work in the tourism industry as a curtain call. They did a really good job at it. That you have a lot to offer. Don't retire, come back and work part time, and I thought they did a really good job at trying to get a group back into the workforce. We'll talk about that too. Is 65 the right time to retire, and what do we have to offer at that point? So
For me, I'm willing to, well, I might have to keep working. I have kids in hockey now. I had my kids later, and so they're just 10 and they're almost 13 now. But for me, it's the flexibility.
Yeah.
Like, so I am kind of on the cusp of, well, I guess am I Gen X? I'm X, aren't I? Yeah. But I'm probably the beginning of the group that just, don't tell me that I have to be here every day at this time. I can't do that.
Yeah. No, that's good.
And I was late today. Oh, barely. Yeah. So anyway, flexibility is important.
I'm Teresa from Firecop, Human Resources Manager. We have a retail business, and we have everything from professional streams, agronomists, pharmacists, to retail, running a till, and so we can't offer that flexibility at a till. So that's a problem. And we're really struggling with SIMP because a lot of our jobs simply aren't eligible. So we can't hire a foreign worker, even if we want to, and we find out afterwards, well, it's not eligible. So we might have to do something different with LMIA, I don't know, because what's working now, we just can't. So then we get them in and we spend time training only to find out that it's not eligible, and you start all over again, and that poor employee has to now go look for something else as well, right? We definitely struggle with retaining. We have all different ages of work, and one comment you made that was really interesting is your kid, you text them and they ghost you. So we have that age group of workers, but while they might not wanna talk to their dad, they want communication at work.
100%. Yeah.
So it's like, you take your personal ideas of what you think that kid might want, and it's totally different at work.
Yeah.
So we're really struggling getting those positions filled. It's a real problem. We have an older board, and even our marketing is, what you market to a 65-year-old to a 20 or 30-year-old is just like night and day, right? So trying to get social media marketing is just something, because that's where it's at.
I actually have a couple of videos that show how we market so different to baby boomers versus
Yes.
like X, Y, Z generation, so.
And then one other comment is, I think engagement is a buzzword. I'd like at the end of the day if I can walk away with a definition.
You will
of that.
definitely have a definition. And you know, it's funny you would say that, because I gotta tell you, and I've been doing this a long time, even experts, I don't think understand what engagement is. I will tell you what it is. Hopefully you'll walk out with a better idea of what it is, but I'll also help you improve it within your organization. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, I can help you improve your engagement within your
It's really
organization.
tough when we have so many different jobs. Some of them are full-time, some of them are Monday to Friday, some of them are part-time, some of them are in the evening, and, you know, they're entry level, and how do you take one word to say, this is what's gonna engage our 585 employees? Cause that's really hard, so.
No, for sure, no, we'll definitely cover that.
Caitlin with Pioneer Co-op, I'm one of the HR advisors there. Yeah, I think Teresa did a good job kind of summing up what our struggles are. For me, I've been there over a decade now, which for my age is kind of off the beaten trail. Yeah, we're dealing with different generations, and that's probably the biggest thing right now. I mean, Pioneer's known for kind of the old west, the old ways. We have managers that have been there 30, 40 years, and now we have people come to the door and we can't even keep them 6 months. So it's trying to find that happy medium and kind of come to the new way, I guess.
Okay, no, we're definitely gonna talk about that.
Austin from Pioneer Co-op, HR advisor. I guess I would say something a little bit different. I guess for me, the thing I'm looking to learn a bit more is how to engage the knowledge transfer of the critical positions, because our staff, there's a lot of retirements gonna happen. I can forecast it at this point, but how do you engage those managers and critical staff to transfer that knowledge over?
Yeah, cause that's a two-way street. They have to wanna give that knowledge away, and then there has to be people that want to absorb that knowledge. And what we're seeing as we see succession planning, people leaving, you're not gonna be able to replace a baby boomer with a person. Like it's, you know, so if you're retiring, it's not like we can pass the reins down, you're gonna do everything this person did, because they might have started in the shop floor and worked their way through 10 different positions, and you just don't have that knowledge. So what we're seeing a lot happening is that your role will be passed on, but it might be passed on to 3 or 4 different people. So it doesn't mean that it takes 3 or 4 people to replace you, it just means that it takes some of that, each of those people's time. So you may pass the title on, so maybe you have a director, someone else might get, but their role will be different than the person that they're replacing when they retire. So, and we'll get into that, but so I think we'll cover that off for sure.
Nathan Sang, I'm with Fieldstone Energy, and we're a industrial, commercial, electrical and instrumentation contractor. And I would say the couple areas we struggle is one, getting young people into the trades.
Right.
And two, retaining them once they have their ticket, because we seem to be a stepping stone. For better jobs once those tickets are in place.
Yeah. No, we're definitely gonna talk about that today. We'll also talk about longevity. How long, what's the life expectancy of a Z generation when you hire them right now? So, no, we'll definitely cover that up.
Hi, I'm Justin Nicholson. I'm the sales manager at Standard Dodge. Our biggest challenge, I guess, is retaining quality employees. And then with the younger generation we have coming in, especially in the sales department, trying to get them to engage and build their portfolio and grow as a salesman, because it's not an easy career to just start out in without contacts and that sort of thing.
And you struggle on the technician side as well, you know, that in your industry, getting people to work. I mean, I know I have a Dodge Caravan, and when I want to bring it in for maintenance, I'm booking it 7 weeks out now in Halifax, because they just don't have the staff to be able to do it, so.
I'm Dustin LaBelle, I'm the service manager at the Dodge dealership in town, and like you said, that is the biggest issue right now. For example, my graduating class in Estevan was about 230 people. It was myself and one other guy that went into automotive. So there's a big lack of skilled labor in our side, and the biggest struggle is getting new people in and that also want to get dirty and stay in these trades where there's a lot of knowledge to take in, a lot of technology technology coming out.
Yeah.
That they need to be able to adapt to and also figure out. So, yeah, I'd say that's the biggest issue we're dealing with right now.
Great, okay, perfect. Okay, well, I have an easy job here today. But in your industry, I maintain all my kids' cars. I live in the bumpers and so, and I spend a ton of time getting dirty. It's actually my kind of happy place is that I can close my eyes and I know exactly what my son's Honda Accord looks like underneath when I crawl underneath it. You can probably remember when you were little, first time it snowed, you ran outside and got a snowflake on your tongue. First time you drove a bicycle without the training wheels, and you looked behind, your mom or dad weren't there. That feeling of camaraderie we had as children when we would get out and play. Now, I grew up in a little town in Cape Breton. We chatted about this. Mom and dad had a rule. You can do whatever you wanted all day long, but when the street lights come on, you best be coming home at the end of the day. But what happened to people when they showed up at work? Why is it we don't have that same level of passion, camaraderie that we had as children? Why do we literally look forward to the streetlights coming on? Because we get to go home. You know, when I first started my career as a speaker, I used to do a lot of stuff. You know, but one of the things I would do is I would coach people. And I'm 62 years old. And age is a big deal. We're going to talk about age quite a bit today. And I would talk to people, and they'd say, you know, Eddie, I work hard all week. Around 4:30 on Friday afternoon, we stop by the liquor store, pick up half a dozen bottles of red wine, drink all weekend long and forget about work, only to get up Monday to do the whole thing all over again. There's got to be more to it. And there is. There are people that show up every day and they love it. They can't wait to get there, and they actually get upset when the streetlights come on because they have to go home. And not because they don't want to go home, but because they love their job. That's the group we're going to talk about, your best. How do you find them? How do you keep them? How do you maybe move some people that aren't your best employees into being your rock stars? So everyone, when they walked in here today, you have some path to success. It could be selling a product. It could be cost containment. It could be safety. It could be hiring people. And in order to do that, you're going to need a highly skilled workforce. Now, we interchange labor market, skill shortage, labor shortage quite a bit. They're two very different things. You can have a labor shortage in one area and a skill shortage in another. You might have a skill shortage here where you're struggling to find a skilled technical resource, but have high levels of unemployment and unskilled workers. So it's all over the map. One thing for sure, we pretty much have a skill shortage in every corner of the country. We have a labor shortage in certain parts of the country and not every part of the country. And this probably will be short-lived as we kind of go through the numbers and start looking at it. So if you look at your goal when you're in a business or non-for-profit or whatever it is, you're looking for some form of maximum results, whatever those results are. Your employees, on the other hand, they show up and they're looking for some level of job satisfaction or you know, the engagement, and we'll teach what that word is as time goes on. The group that has the highest level of satisfaction, the most engaged employees that are knocking it out of the park for you, are called your most engaged. And that's the group we're going to talk about. The ones that are knocking it out of the park for you, you get the highest level of productivity out of them. They're the safest employees. They're less likely to leave, more likely to recommend your place as a place to work and a place to do business, and they have the highest level of job satisfaction. Now, I'm really good with numbers, like really good. When it comes to what's happening in the job market, labor market, unemployment rates, I know that stuff pretty cold. I spend about an hour and a half, 2 hours every single day researching the numbers. But I have to tell you, I've been really busy the last month or so traveling, but I've also been really preoccupied with what's happening south of the border with the election. So if I'm off a number or two, the theory is still right. I just might be off a percentage point on something now and again, but you know, if I spend the morning going over numbers, and we are going to spend a lot of time on it, I'm going to put you to sleep. And I don't want to do that. So I'll frame it up in a way that I think you're going to find it relatively interesting when we kind of look at the data. So, you know, as we kind of hit the balance of 2024 and through 2025, you know, what do we still see as the biggest challenge? And it's the labor market. This is a big deal. It's not going to go away. And there's a couple things that are driving the behavior that's happening. One we did not see coming, and it's post-pandemic, the way people work post-pandemic. We didn't see this coming. The change in demographics was very well documented. We knew this was coming. Nobody paid attention to it. but we knew it was coming, and it wasn't a 4-year sexy election cycle kind of topic. So because of that, we weren't really thinking about it till it really hit us in the behind. This one here, we didn't see it coming. The way people work in 2024 is very, very different than the way people worked in 2019. And where we are right now, remote work, hybrid work environment, all this stuff that you're hearing, we were gonna get there. And it was probably about 7 years down the road from where we are right now, but we were gonna get there anyway. And, you know, and I know people have said, and we're gonna get in the whole remote hybrid. It's the most controversial thing I'd probably talk about. You know, if I'm in, and I was surprised, but I was in Ottawa the other day talking to a group of CEOs, and they were very anti-remote work. They wanted their people back, which I thought was really odd for Ottawa. In fact, I did 3 CEO sessions in Ottawa, and 2 of them were kind of outskirts of Ottawa, that Canada out around the airport, but one was in the downtown core, and it was in the downtown core the week that the federal government made their employees come back to work. And they have more people coming back than they have desks for them to sit in or parking spots for cars. So the gentleman who was organizing the meeting, he said, Eddie, if I were you, I'd drop your car off at the airport the night before and take an Uber down. Because he said, you will not get a parking spot. And that's how crazy it was. But it's a very controversial thing when we talk about remote work, but we're gonna dig into that. But we were gonna get there anyway. The one thing that you know, and I don't wanna ruin it because I don't wanna get ahead of myself. So this is the question first everyone was asking when we were coming out of the pandemic. When's it gonna go back to the way it was? You know, are we all gonna go back to work? Things are gonna go back to normal? And the one thing we know for absolute certain, it is never going back to the way it was. We know that with absolute certainty. It's never gonna go back to the way it was. And right now, if we kind of look at the job market, if we look at knowledge workers, people who can work from home or work remotely in some form, 50% of those employees have gone back to work like nothing's ever happened. Just the way it always was. They're banging on a keyboard or doing whatever they were doing, back in their office. 50% of the workforce are either in a hybrid work environment or they're working full-time from home. But 12% of the population are full-time from home. So will the numbers change? Absolutely. There'll be pressure. People want their employees to come back. It might go 60-40, it might even go 70-30, but there's always gonna be a percentage of people that are never gonna come back in the office. So we know that, and we'll dig into this on why that matters to everyone in the room. Doesn't matter whether you're digging a hole, driving a bus, turning a wrench, it's gonna have an impact on you. So, home versus office. So, and I don't wanna tie up a lot of time, but I wouldn't mind, we're not gonna put you in groups, but I wouldn't mind giving me some feedback. Just tell me, what do you think about, your opinion of remote work? If you think it's gonna impact your industry, because I just wanna kind of start a discussion. So anyone around the table, tell me what you think of remote work. Do you think it has an impact on your industry, or? This is where you would.
Mine, it doesn't.
Okay.
But when the pandemic did happen, I had to stay home for the first little while with the kids because they were smaller. And I knew right off the hop, I could not do it.
Okay.
I'm like, I can't stay home. I felt myself getting depressed. Cause I need the people, like I need to be at work. But yeah, like you can't, it's easily to get distracted, I found, being remote.
Okay.
So I like being in the office.
Okay. Anyone else? What do you think of remote?
We had some that, we've adopted now that we work remote when we need to. So we were the same, and we tried it and we're like, no. We thought we would like it. And then we're like, no, I don't wanna do that permanently, but it opened up an ability for some of us to do it on occasion when we need to.
Yeah.
Right.
We did admit, just within our group anyway, if you think I'm working 8 hours when I'm at home, you're wrong.
No.
Cause I'm not getting 8 hours in from 8 to 5. But we also found that at 8 o'clock at night, we're still doing emails. So our 8 hours were probably spread out about 15. So you still work, just different hours.
Yeah.
But again, in our retail, there's only a handful of people that we can do that with, because other people physically need to be at the till bringing groceries through. So.
Okay, anyone else?
I liked it. I liked the option we had with it. Just, I guess, that whole 15 hours, like your house became your workplace, so there's never an escape from anything. It's just like you're constantly there, so That was the one negative with it, is just felt like you never left the workplace either.
Yeah. Well, my daughter, who's a millennial, you're probably a Z generation, right? Are you Z?
31.
No, you'd be probably a millennial. My daughter's 33. She was working full-time in an office prior to the pandemic, started working from home, and then bought a dog. And can't imagine ever leaving the dog to go to work, like, you know, and then had a baby. So, you know, like, she just can't get her head wrapped around. She said, Dad, I'm never, ever gonna walk back in an office again. So I mean, she's on a complete opposite side of that spectrum. I think if it was me, I'd wanna go to work. I love being around people, I love that interaction. I think in a rural area like you have, there's more of a case for going into the office, because getting there is not really a big challenge. But if you've gotta go 2.5 hours or an hour and a half on the 401 in Toronto, get to a cubicle to bang on a keyboard, then it doesn't maybe make sense in that case. So I think we're gonna kind of sort that all out. So what about people that are in industries that their people have to come to work? What do you think that does to your industry? Like, has remote work impacted you at all? Like in your case, your guys have to come in and turn a wrench, right?
The biggest thing, I think, is actually training purposes in the Chrysler world. So they've moved pretty much all training to virtual.
Okay.
Which is quite difficult when it comes to a hands-on job.
Yeah.
Only the highest level training now is basically done where it's a new engine comes out or something, I want you to physically pull it apart, see what you're talking about. Almost everything is virtual, so the training is kind of a disconnect, because it's just, you're not at a location, you're sitting there with your phone in your hand too while you're on a computer screen, so the training's not as good.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest impact, I'd say. Other than that, I don't think there's huge impact, short of some people that physically cannot leave their home to get to, because they're working to get to an appointment. So that change has been, we're trying to pick more vehicles up.
Right.
But that's really about all I have seen so far.
Okay.
I think it affects our applicants, because they know if we are asking for a cashier, that's never gonna be that option.
Yeah.
And so they might apply, but they won't stay.
So have you moved toward self-checkout yet? Are you doing any self?
We've had that for quite a few years, some.
Okay. Is it helping you at all?
Well, there's lots of things kind of at play, because also theft is really on the increase, so
Yeah.
that's a problem. So, you know, we had talked about, well, yeah, let's go there, but then we see that other side of it, so.
Yeah. I think, you know, I look at everything from, like, I look at Tesla, and I see Tesla as kind of the introduction into electric cars. We may look back at some day and say, remember there was a car called a Tesla? You know, like they just might be, and I think the cashier is a step to something else. And you know, one of the things that I noticed was just 2 days ago, I'm in the Toronto departure level, and they have this box, like a glass box, and there's a 3-dimensional person in it, and it's literally like I'm looking at you. It's not it's 3-dimensional. So it explains how to use this store. So when you walk into the store, you scan your credit card on the way in, you take whatever you want in the store, and when you walk out, it charges your credit card. There's no employees. So I think self-checkout it's a stepping stone to get to something else, and I don't think there's probably a retailer in North America that wants self-checkout. You know, a lot of people move to self-checkout because they just can't find cashiers, and the theft is, I mean, there's a little meme on Facebook the other day, and it said I went through the checkout at Costco and my bill was $400. I wanted a second opinion, so I went through the self-checkout and it was $240. So we know that is a problem. Okay, anyone else on their opinion, especially if you're not in where you can't allow people to work remotely?
When the pandemic hit, the Newcomer Welcome Center, we had a rotation of people that needed to be in the office, because we're a service-oriented company, so we needed to see people. But at the same time, the people that we are serving would mostly come from rural areas, and so internet access was also a challenge.
Yeah.
So for us to do hybrid work, we sometimes do programs, activities over Zoom, where we can invite more of our rural clients to join, but most of the time we have it in person so that there's also the social aspect.
Yeah. Okay. I know in my industry, I mean, I make a living standing in front of an audience, and we all went virtual, and it was painful, like from my perspective, doing virtual I did one for you guys, actually, and it was, yours was the only one I liked, all the rest I didn't know. There were some that were like long ones, virtual events were very, at the beginning we were trying to figure out, you know, kind of how do we all fit into that. But let me just throw a couple things out on how it impacts every single person in the room. It does not matter what industry you're in. During the pandemic, 237,000 people left the hospitality industry and moved into other industries, and they're never going back. So, and many of them moved into industries where they could work remotely or a hybrid work environment or so on. A taxi company in Edmonton was 650 cabs, and the last year of owning their cabs, which was year 4, they would always keep their cabs for 4 years, and the last year of owning their cabs was when most of the maintenance requirements were on the vehicle in year 4. They couldn't find a mechanic if their life depended on it. So they decided they would keep their cabs for 3 years and buy more hybrid cabs that required less maintenance. So, you know, every industry is impacted by remote work, not because of remote work. 'Cause, I mean, obviously that is part of it. You know, people do want some flexibility. Some people might want to work from home. But what you're seeing, and I suspect you would probably know this, Carla, better than I would, every provincial government in Canada is coming up with some form of what they call micro-training. Are you guys doing some form of micro-training? The whole purpose of that program is to steal people from other industries. Now, I spoke in Saskatchewan last year at the Heavy Equipment Operators Association here and I talked to the lady who's the president of the association ahead of time, and she said to me, she said, Eddie, she said, if you had told me 4 years ago, you're coming to Saskatchewan because we can't find people to operate heavy equipment, I would have told you, out of your mind. She said, we're the second highest paid industry in the province next to the mining industry. And she said, we just can't get people. And she said, what are you gonna do? And I said, I don't wanna simplify it, but every industry has 2 choices. One is you've gotta start getting to the grade 8 students. You've gotta get in really early and get them to wanna be in your trade. So whatever that trade is, waiting till they're in grade 11 to 12 is kind of late to get them to come to the dance. And the other thing is, and every industry is doing it right now, you have to steal people from other industries. And we're seeing people poaching people from other industries that we've never experienced before. So whether it impacts you or not, the flexibility impacts you. And I'll give you a couple examples. There's one of the AV companies, and I'll just say it was Kawasaki, and I'm not sure if it was, but I think it's Kawasaki. They had to put a new shift on the shop floor. So they're trying to figure out how are they gonna do it? What are they gonna target? How are they gonna find the employees? So what they decided is they would start the shift at 10 o'clock in the morning. So my daughter, who's a millennial, you think she's 100 years old, she'd go, oh, that's for the Z generation, they're lazy, they don't wanna get up in the morning. So, but that isn't really what it was. But they wanted to start at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the shift was gonna end at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So a little tiny short shift, 10 till 2. Who were they gonna target? Well, they said, we're gonna target the hospitality industry, because in the US, sometimes they actually work for free. All you get is your tips. Like, they can really rape and pillage in that industry in the US. In fact, Chef Michaels, who is our celebrity chef in Canada, says often when you go out to a restaurant in the night and you're having the time of your life and one of the best nights of your life, go behind the doors and they're having the worst night of their life in the kitchen. So they went after that market. They said, we're gonna target that market. We're gonna pay them $19 an hour US, which was good money to be able to target that market to win. But who were they really looking for? What they were really looking for were people that are interested in dropping their children off at school, going to work, leaving work at 2 o'clock, and picking their children up at school. It was the most successful shift Kawasaki ever put on the shop floor. The most productive, the most engaged, and the least amount of turnover. And it's because that group of people were looking for that kind of flexibility. Yet we don't want to schedule somebody that come in a half an hour behind the rest of the group because they have to go to a nursing home and feed their mother before they go to work. So Ganong in Canada, 23 shifts a week to accommodate the needs of all of their employees. So what people are really looking for are flexibility. People that work from home are looking for flexibility, but people that have to come to work are also looking for some form of flexibility. So Chef Michael's, he's an interesting gentleman. He's a big, big man. If you ever have an opportunity to see him speak, he's a phenomenal speaker. I've shared the stage with him a couple times. We were at an entrepreneurs forum in New Brunswick back in June, and he stood in front of an audience and he looked at everyone and he said, I'm telling you right now, Z generation need to be validated every day. And you can see everyone rolling their eyes. And he said, look, I get it. I know what you're thinking. He said, that's the world we're living in, right? So he said, what we do is every day we get people in a circle and we validate them. You did a great job yesterday, the way you handled that. Oh, we're so proud of you, the way you did this. And he said, we literally go around and we validate every single person in the room before they start. And he said, if you are a customer and you come into our facility and you mistreat one of our employees, we ask you to leave. He said, we always put our employees before we put the customers. And then he said, we pay really well. And you can't tip in their restaurants. He said, but we pay really well. He said, we have like 0 turnover in our staff. He said, I'm laying in bed one night and I'm thinking, the poor chefs are working like 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. He said, we give all the chefs a big raise and we cut them back to 4 days a week. He said, they're happier, they're making better food, they're more engaged, they're more productive. So, and you're thinking, well, how could that work? $300 a plate to eat, and they're booking into late 2025 if you want to go eat at his restaurant. And he's doing stuff that nobody else is thinking about doing, but it's working for him. So it's really, it's about the flexibility, what can you offer your people that are flexible? And remote work is just a thing everybody's picking on, but it's because that is one of the things that people are looking for. But people are looking for other forms of flexibility as well. So we didn't see that one coming. We didn't see the pandemic, the remote work, and I'm going to dig a little bit more into that in a minute because it has a bigger impact than anything that we are talking about here that most people don't realize when it comes to recruitment. And the other one is a change in demographics, and that's where we get the where did everyone go? So, and I literally get that question everywhere I go. I'm in a Starbucks lineup not that long ago. My wife and I are talking about the speech I was delivering. Lady was in front of me in the lineup. She turns around, she looks at me, and she goes, "Where did everybody go? Like, why are they all sitting home? Like, what's happening? Young people don't want to work today." I hear every one of the stories. So I want to tell you where everyone went, so you have a bit of an insight of what the kind of market looks like. So in the last 100 years, if you were on the human resource side of your organization and you were trying to hire someone, this is what the hiring market looked like. Whatever worked for you. You could have put a billboard out in front of your building that said hiring forklift drivers, hiring laborers. You could have ran an ad on LinkedIn. You could have went to the community college looking for mechanics. Whatever it is, you had a method. You hired people and you promoted them, and eventually they became senior staff and they retired. Yours will probably die before they retire, but they normally would retire, and then you would go back to the pool and you would hire someone. Well, this is what it looks like in Canada when you're trying to hire someone right now. This group here, the new hires in Canada are made up of 2 different groups. One would be Z generation entering the workforce, and the other would be immigrants moving into Canada. And the numbers are small. When we look at what the access, where we have access to, millennials have found their way in the world. So millennials are, lots of times I do these CEO sessions, the CEOs are millennials. So millennials, you're successful, you have families, you're community leaders, you're coaches of the hockey teams, you're doing it, like you're there. X generation have been disproportionately promoted because X generations look the most like baby boomers, and baby boomers always promoted based on tenure. If you're here a long time, you get a promotion. Not always the best workers, but more based on tenure. I spoke to an energy company not that long ago. There was 450 managers in the room. 46% of them were X generation, but you only make up 21% of the population. So we tend to over promote this group. We're putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the X generation. Baby boomers are leaving. They're exiting in big numbers. So this here The last 100 years, you could not fail as a manager in Canada. The numbers were in your favor. People were disposable, especially in places like Fort McMurray and the oil and gas industry where, you know, they could fire people at the drop of a hat and they just went back to the pool and hired someone else. But what we're finding is the pool is getting harder and harder to hire people from. When we look at this takes a whole different skill. To manage people when it's not in your favor, it takes a whole skill.
Take a picture.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I will send you the PowerPoint presentation. So it'll be a PDF, but I'll give you all the slides. Yeah?
So why is it so much smaller? Do we know?
I'll
sorry.
explain exactly why it's so much smaller when we dig into the numbers. So, and which will start here. So this set of slides, years ago, I went to Alberta. There was a provincial government group called EARN, Employee Attraction Retention Network. I've been talking about this topic since 2005. I've been using this set of slides since 2005, but every year I use them, it's for a different reason. So now what I want to share with you is the impact that baby boomers had along the way and the impact they're having now. And the other thing that happened is baby boomers never did what they were supposed to do. Like if we look at all the way along, we said, well, at this point in the baby boomer's life, this is gonna happen. At this point, this is gonna happen. What happened is it didn't happen. And where it really became apparent to me was, I was speaking to a group at the Burlington Golf Course in Toronto, and I'm driving back to the Toronto airport, and I'm listening to CBC's interviewing somebody from Census Canada. And it was about 18 months ago when they announced there's a whole bunch of old people. It's like this epiphany they had. It was a whole bunch of old people. And the CBC rep and the Census Canada kind of get into it a little bit. Like, I was surprised at the tone of and I think the Census Canada person was annoyed with her because she had so little knowledge of what was happening with the age and demographics. And one of the things she said, it is not a sexy 4-year election cycle, so people wouldn't think about it. But she did say all along the way that, baby boomers were predicted to do certain things and they didn't happen. And one of the things that she said, and I can't believe she actually said it, and I think she almost regretted it after she said it, she said the baby boomers aren't dying fast enough. And it's a problem, the fact that they're not dying fast enough. So I speak in that industry quite a bit. In fact, I recently spoke at Winnipeg at the National Undertakers Association. I did some work in Atlantic Canada with a company, they're called SI, they're out of Texas. Next to Boeing, they have more book business than any company on the planet. $17 billion in book business. People paying for their funerals ahead of time, it's a massive industry. So my friend Greg McDonald, who heads up that group in Atlantic Canada, he called me, and I was doing a session for them in January. He called me in December and he said, Ed, are you busy? I said, oh yeah, Greg, I'm busy. I said, I'm on a plane every day. He said, oh, me too. He said, people are dying. He's the only person that I talk to that gets excited when people are dying. He said, business is good, people are dying. He said, they weren't dying during the pandemic. He said, they're dying now. He said, so that's good. So I want to share with you kind of what happened to baby boomers and why we're feeling what we're feeling right now and where are we going to head with this in the future. So back in the 1950s, 1960s, this was the baby boomers under the age of 14. We had the largest per capita baby boom population on the planet. Not the largest baby boom, but the largest per capita. So we were like the friskiest group of people after the war compared to other G7 countries. And that's a big deal. And the other thing that we've done, and you would know this because you're in that immigration space, we suppressed immigration for years in Canada. So if you were to look at this number, when this group gets to the end over here, if that was the US, they have enough young people coming in, it basically wipes out the challenge they're having with the aging population. We just really started to ramp up immigration in the last couple of years. So we have a different problem facing Canada than other countries. So here, at this time, we built tens of thousands of schools, pediatric wards, baby food manufacturing facility. Sears came out with the wish book, they put Winnie the Pooh on the cover. And unless you're a baby boomer, you have no idea what I'm even talking about. But then in the 1960s, 1970s, something very interesting happened. Baby boomers actually started to come of age. So we're going to do a little study here. So if you're comfortable with your age, if you were born on or before 1964, stand up. So you and I are the only two baby boomers in the room. We're born on or before 1964. So just curious, were you the only child growing up? Did you have any siblings?
Yes.
So did I. So, you and I both represent families larger than we're currently producing in Canada. So we currently produce as low in some provinces as 1.3 children per one female to as high as 1.6, all a declining population. So I would do this, and I started this in 2005. I would get the audience members to stand up. 2005, if I asked the baby boomers in the room to stand up, the whole room stood up. I mean, I literally have been looking at 50 Shades of Grey looking back at me since 2005. The first time I encountered a group where there wasn't a baby boomer in the room was a Boston Pizza Conference in Edmonton. 85 managers, not a single baby boomer in the room. I was shocked. I didn't even know where to go because I had a whole plan on where I was going with this talk. So I've learned over time that it's not uncommon to have, I'm the oldest person in the room. But what I would do is I would say if you're one of two, you can sit down. If you're one of three, kind of like that, you go to a wedding and you dance and you're who's the last one standing, married the longest. So it's not uncommon with baby boomers that they had 10 siblings. And it's not uncommon if they had 10 siblings they're from Newfoundland. Like for some reason, some of the biggest families would come from Newfoundland. My dad's from Newfoundland, comes from a really large family. But the largest family I ever encountered was a gentleman from LeMoine, just outside of Red Deer. 17 siblings. So I said to him, I said, what was it like growing up with 17 kids? He goes, it was pretty crazy in the house. And I said, did you have like a big house? No, he said, little tiny farmhouse. He said, I said, well, like, how did you sleep 17 kids? He said, not the way you would have thought. He said, we slept our kids based on how long they were. So he said, 3 long ones up and down in the bed, 2 short ones across the bottom. He said, you didn't want to be a short one. He said, that was the worst part of the bed to be sleeping. He said, even bathing wasn't a thing with us. We would have to boil water. We take turns bathing. So certain kids got to bathe 1 week. And then he said, the bottom of the bed was bad. So I said, just curious, when did you move out? And he said, I was 17 years old. And I said, was that like normal? He goes, no. He said, Mom and Dad were looking at me, what's wrong with this one? Why is he still here? So it got me thinking, when do kids move out now? What relevance does it have in the job market? So first one I thought of was my daughter, 23 years old, living at home with us. How many of you have kids? So you're all part of the problem here. So I go home and I look at Sasha and I said to her, Sasha, when are you leaving? She said, Dad, I'm not going anywhere tonight. I said, no, Dad, not tonight. Like, when are you moving out? And she goes, did I do something wrong? I said, no. I said, I'm just curious. I said, I just got to thinking, like, haven't you thought about it? She said, no, not really. I said, really? She said, Dad, you bought me a car, you paid for the insurance, and if I'm downtown at the bar and I'm running low on cash, you take your phone out and you put money in my bank account. I own every piece of electronics now, and the man, Mom does a laundry for me. Like, why would I leave? Like, so it got me thinking, like, when do kids leave and what relevance does it have? Well, my daughter's a millennial, so at the time, it would have been prior to 2008. Statistically, millennials would stay with you until they're 28 years old. So why is it relevant? It's relevant because the life expectancy today of a Z generation, so it'd be the people entering the workforce today of a Z generation, the life expectancy when they join your place of employment is that they're going to last less than 18 months before they move on to another job. So baby boomers didn't. Baby boomers, stayed in their careers significantly longer. So I'm in Ottawa, there's a group of folks around the table, and somebody said, it's funny you would say 18 months, because when we hire people, we ask them in the interview process, give us 24 months. If you give us 24 months, we'll work on your resume. That's important with Z generation. We'll work on your resume for you, and at the end of 24 months, we'll help you find another job. They said, we'll even hire a headhunter to help you get another job. And I said, really? You'd invest 2 years in them and let them walk out the door? He said, oh yeah. He said, we say that, but he said, what we do is we try and build such a compelling story and a wonderful company to work for that in 24 months, they don't want to leave. And I said, how many will leave? He said, you'll be surprised, we keep a lot. He said, but it gives us access to people that we otherwise wouldn't have because we're promising to build their careers and help them with their career path. So last year I spoke in Toronto at the McDonald's National Conference. And one of the things that really kind of struck me with that conference was many of the executives, many of the vice presidents, even the president of McDonald's Canada started their careers flipping burgers at 16 years old at McDonald's. And they never walked into McDonald's that day thinking, someday I'm going to be president of McDonald's. They walked in thinking this is a part-time job to help pay for my education or buy my first car or buy a new pair of jeans or something. But then whoever those people work for in their careers, wherever it was, they built a compelling enough story for them to want to stay. So that's the key, is to build that story. My wife and I decided we wanted to go to Alberta a couple of years ago. We wanted one more kind of adventure, so it was about 80, it was a number of years ago now. And our idea was that we would stay for 3 years and then we'd move back to Atlantic Canada, but we just wanted to explore the mountains. We went to Banff, we calculated over 300 times. It's one of my most favorite places on the planet. So our plan was 3 years, we stayed for 8. Once we got there, we loved it so much, and that's what you have to do. You have to figure out how am I gonna get them into your organizations to get them on site. But the other thing you have to do is you have to onboard fast. Because, just to throw it out there, most people when they walk in, for everyone looking for a job in Canada right now, there's 1.6 jobs available. So when somebody walks in the door, especially if they're a skilled worker, like if you have a mechanic that's walking in the door, they have another offer. You're not the only game in town for them. Most people will walk in the door with another offer in their back pocket. So when they walk in the door with the other offer in the back pocket, they have what's called buyer's remorse, where they think, maybe I should have done the other job. I'm not really sure if I like this one. So from the time you hire someone till they get buyer's remorse, guess how long you have? Guess.
24 hours.
24 hours? A week.
I was gonna say a week.
53 hours. Yeah, 53 hours from the time you hire someone until they start going, I don't know. So the days of hiring someone and saying, why don't you just sit in the office here and check out our website and I'll circle back around 3 o'clock, and if you have any questions about it, then, I'll set you up for lunch with Gerald tomorrow. He's been here 20 years, he can answer any questions. You gotta get people in and get them integrated in your culture as fast as you can in meaningful work, so that they're gonna wanna be working and not giving them the worst jobs, because the days of the last one in the door getting the worst shifts, the worst jobs, if you want a recipe to have people leave in a short period of time, that's the recipe to have them leave in a short period of time. And look, I don't want to depress you, because some of you are thinking, oh my God, these kids are never going to move out. The most recent data, so if you have a Z generation living in your house now, 33 years old is what they say they're going to stay. In fact, I live in a fairly nice neighborhood just outside of Halifax, and we all have acreages, so everyone in our neighborhood would have at least 2.5 acres. Our provincial government is, and I don't know the amount, but it's like, they'll give you $40-some thousand toward building a secondary suite on your property. So we're seeing all these little mini homes being built on the acreages, and they're for one of 2 reasons. One is to put your parents in it, and the other is to put your children in it. If you can't find a place, if you want to at least get them somewhat out of the house, even if it's on the other side of the driveway, they get them to move out. So in the 1970s, 1980s, baby boomers started to fall in love and get married. They became young managers, supervisors, foremans, and started to find their way. In the 1980s to 1990s, baby boomers actually started to spend money like drunken sailors. So baby boomers are an incredibly materialistic generation. Symbols of success are very important to a baby boomer. A Harley Davidson, a Cadillac, a Mont Blanc pen, Prada purses. I said to my daughter one day, my wife and I, we have probably $20,000 worth Old Country Rose dishes that haven't seen the light of day in good 15 years. They're in several totes somewhere. And I said to my daughter, I said, Sash, we have these beautiful Old Country old dishes. I said, when something happens to your mother and I, would you like them? My daughter goes, Dad, that's like your symbol of success. She said, I have zero interest in Old Country Roads dishes, right? But that's what baby boomers were. And the reason why it was a big deal is baby boomers back in the 1980s and 1990s, especially in places like Western Canada, we drove interest rates into double digits from consumer spending. So you had some interesting phenomena. So you had jingle mail. So jingle mail is when you would mail the keys to your house back to the bank, because the chattel mortgage, especially in Alberta, you could sue for the mortgage or the house, but you couldn't do both. So if they took the house back, they couldn't sue you for the balance of the mortgage. That law doesn't exist anymore now, but it did back then. And then the other phenomena, especially in Alberta, they have what's called dollar homes. So you can assume someone else's mortgage for $1. So people would buy, if you had $10, you could buy basically 10 houses. So they would buy multiple houses. They would not pay the mortgage on them, rent them out for 6 months, and then mail the keys back to the bank in jingle mail. And the banks would literally shake the mail to find out how many people were sending their keys to their houses back. Now it wouldn't be, didn't even impact your credit. If they took the house back, then it didn't impact your credit. But here's what nobody was thinking about. It's the X generation. First negative growth generation in the history of our country. And it happened in every G7 country, and it didn't matter then, but it's gonna matter now. And because we had this massive amount of people in the workforce. So then something interesting happened in the 1990s to 2000 that's having a massive impact in 2024. So the theory here was, at this point, the baby boomers' children would start to leave the house, theoretically, because we left the house early as a baby boomer generation. I moved out as 16 years old. The baby boomers, the theory is that they would sell their homes to the X generation. The X generation would sell their starter homes to the millennials. The millennials would move out of apartments for the immigrants. And we would have a natural progression of housing in Canada. And it happened for about a New York minute. Some baby boomers started to downsize, and then they realized they were just too young. They were just not ready for it. I remember looking at my grandmother on the beach in front of our cottage. She was 55 years old. My grandmother was an old lady at 55, an old lady. Now, she lived to be 106. At 106, she looked identical to the woman that was on the beach at 55, but I'm 62. You know, I go to the gym 3 times a week. I race bikes. I'm active. I walk 10,000 steps a day. So what happened was the baby boomers in places like Toronto, they downsized, they bought condos, they hated it, they sold their condos, and they bought back their homes. And they started buying and selling their homes to each other until in most markets, they priced them completely out of the market. And in fact, most X generation are not interested in a 5-bedroom house, a large carbon footprint, and a big mortgage payment. So because of this decision that they made back in the 1990s, we have a housing crisis in 2024. If they had done what they were supposed to do back then and downsized into smaller units or apartments, then we wouldn't have a housing crisis that we have right now. When you look at the numbers, the amount of over 65 that are kind of living in their own places, like I live on an acreage. I have 2.5 acres of land. I live in a 4-bedroom house. It's just my wife and I. My best friend just downsized to a house in our neighborhood. He's 68 years old. He downsized to a 5-bedroom house. Downsized to a 5-bedroom house. My mother, who you and I talked about, my mother's 89 years old. She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment. My mother shouldn't be in a 2-bedroom apartment. That should be for an immigrant that's moving into our country. I shouldn't be living in a 4-bedroom house. It should be for a young family that has teenage children. Like, what happened is the baby boomers are hanging on so long in their homes, and most of them, you're gonna take them out feet first at the end of their life because they're occupying a piece of property that really wasn't meant for them to stay in that long. And it's created a housing crisis that we can't fix overnight. And nobody thought about this all the way through, but you know, in places like Halifax right now, less than 1% vacancy rate. We have over 2,000 people living in tents. We have a whole ball field of kids that live in tents that get up every day and go to university. No place to live. We have people moving in from other countries that have no place to live. So we have a housing crisis unlike anything we've ever seen before, and there's not gonna be a quick fix because we can't build that inventory up, and because the Census Canada person said the baby boomers are living too long, and they're staying in those homes. So in 2000 and 2010, the baby boomers started thinking about it's time to retire. You can start to see what's happening behind this. Would be Z generation. So it's a Z generation, is a little baby boom population that are happening. And depending on the province, the birth rate would be higher, or you've taken young people from other provinces. So places like Ontario or Alberta, where they would bring young people from, say, Eastern Canada, and they would raise their children, you'll have a higher birth rate. Provinces with higher immigrants would have a higher birth rate because immigrants have a higher birth rate than Canadians. Areas that have more Indigenous population have a higher birth rate because Indigenous have a higher birth rate than, so certain provinces will have a little bit more of a population. Here's where we are kind of now. So between the ages of 55 and 64, that's increasing by 73%. Above the age of 65, they're the ones that are leaving. That's the ones Nova Scotia want to come back in the tourism industry. That increases by 53%. So this is what it looks like, and this is why we have such a problem with housing. And so if you look at under the age of 15, so who asked me why is it so small entering? So this is why it's so small entering. So if we look at the people that are entering the workforce now, just versus 1970s, but I'll go back and I'll explain a little bit farther, but the 1970s, this would be today's Z generation. Back then, I'm not sure what would probably be the X generation, which is a small generation. So 6.4 million Canadians under the age of 15 heading toward the workforce. In 2022 was 6 million. But if you look at this number, over the age of 65, in the 1970s it was 1.7 million and living in houses, you know, because the boomers would stay in their homes. In 2022, 7.3 million Canadians over the age of 65 are alive, retired, putting burden on the healthcare system and still living in their homes. And we've created a bit of a housing crisis. So just to go a little bit farther back on why that number's so small now, because this is a little misleading. In 1935 in Canada, the workforce was predominantly male. So we always had women in the workforce, but a very, very big percentage of the workforce was male. 1935, when the war broke out, and men exited, women entered the workforce. So we started to train a whole different gender of the population in the workforce that didn't work before that. When the men came back from war, many of those women exited the workforce again. I come from a family like that, where my mother worked, and then when she had babies, she stayed home until those babies were 14 years old. So I'm a baby boomer, so when I turned 14 years old, my mother went back into the workforce. So why does this all matter? There's two things at play here. We added a gender to the workforce that didn't exist, a massive amount of people. Female workers from 1935 till where we are now. But we also added the largest per capita baby boom population in the world to our workforce. So we had this massive amount of resources that we could, you know, pull into the workforce to build the GDP of our country. We don't have anything like that now. We don't have like a gender sitting at home that we can hire. We don't have another baby boom population. So the first number, which was really wide at one point, was because baby boomers were so big in population and we added the gender. If you look at the different generations in the workplace, we still have a big disparity in women versus men in the workforce. In the older workforce, so the participation would be more toward men than women, but the younger the population, the more evenly it's becoming matched. So we have almost, not equal amount, but more women and men like getting closer together. And then some stats are showing that we actually have more women managers, young women managers in Canada than we have men. So, but that's where it came from. We added a gender, the baby boom population, and now we have this massive amount that are leaving and very few actually coming in. So that number, so if we were to take, and I may be wrong a little bit on the numbers, but if we were to take, I'll show you one more number first. Oh, and just this, because I don't want to completely depress you. I think this is the best time to be alive and working in Canada. I really do. I mean, I look at many of you and you have like full heads of hair and shiny young faces, and I think it's the best time to be working. If you're worth your salt as a leader or a manager or an organization that work for, it's your turn. We rewarded bad management for years because the numbers were always in their favor, but the numbers are not in their favor now, and we reward good management now. You know, people that do the right things. And I look at my son and my daughter, and they will go to their employers in the future, and your employees will come to you in the future, and they'll say, look, if you don't treat me better, there are 5 jobs waiting for me. And I don't think there's a baby boomer, and even some of the older X generation that would be out there, I don't think there's a baby boomer in the room that someone at some time, and for me it was the fish plant in North Sydney, where my boss' name was Chess, where your boss didn't look at you and say, if you don't like it here, punch out and go home. There are 10 people waiting for your job. Mm-hmm. So we see this big shift in power away from, you know, the owners and the managers having the power to the employees having the power. So you're driving home on Friday and you hear that Spotify laid off 3,000 people, or some company out here laid off 3,000 people. Amazon laid off 17,000 people globally. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people got laid off. But when you're driving home on Friday of this week, and you look back at the last 5 days, 12,500 Canadians turned 65 years old, 8,000 left the workforce. So Spotify might have laid off 3,000 people this week, but 8,500 of them retired and left. So every single week, we're losing 5,000 to 10,000 employees, 5,000 to 10,000. So whenever you hear something like a layoff, you know, even if it was Amazon is gonna lay off 19,000 people globally, we will lose 19,000 people in the next 3 weeks in Canada, in just Canada alone. So when we look at, then go back to that part, if we were to take the amount of Canadians that are retiring, that are exiting the workforce around that 65 years of age, at 8,500, then look at the amount of people that are entering the workforce. So we have about 9,200 Canadians turning 16 every single week. So we have a disparity there. Take the 500,000 immigrants that will move into Canada that are permanent immigrants, not part of the temporary foreign worker, but the 500,000 that Trudeau talks about, people are gonna move into the country. We're about 132,000 people short every year to keep the GDP where it is right now.
It's not working, I'm depressed.
What's that?
It's not working, I'm depressed.
That's right. And then the other thing is, and you can attest to this, when we bring an immigrant into the country, of the 500,000, not all 500,000 are employable. So when we would, some of that would be refugees, but we have a program in Canada. So if I hired, say, a mechanical engineer from Bangladesh, and I'm really happy I got this mechanical engineer, I'm gonna pay them 100 grand a year. I always use 100, 150. Everyone gets paid 150 if you work for me, because that's the easy numbers. So I'm gonna pay $100,000 a year. The first paycheck that I give this new employee from Bangladesh, guess where the money went? Back to Bangladesh. Because they have to support their family, so they're gonna send that money home. We don't want that. We want that money to stay in Canada, so we're gonna bring the family over. We're gonna integrate the family. So when we bring the family over, we're gonna bring 3 children under the age of 15 and a spouse who doesn't speak English yet. So now we've got 5 people into the country, but 1 of them is employable. Now, this is not a negative thing. This is actually a very positive thing. The problem with Canada, and you can attest to this because you're playing that space, we're really late trying to catch up on the immigration numbers. We should have been doing this 15 years ago. So if you go south of the border, they've been bringing immigrants into the US for so long, even not all the rhetoric around people pouring out, but legitimate immigrants into the US for so long. They don't have the same problem we have with a skill shortage. Like, they do have a skill shortage, but not the problem that we have. But what'll happen in the long term is those 3 children will go through our education system. They'll enter the workforce and be very productive. The spouse will learn to speak English and probably enter the workforce. And we'll have 5 people that will enter the workforce. The problem we have is we're trying to play catch up, and we're late to the dance. So it's gonna take us a couple years to kind of sort this through, so these people get through our education system and enter back into the workforce. But you know, even with the numbers like they are right now, we're still short. And that doesn't allow for any GDP growth. To maintain a 2.5% GDP growth in the country, so you all get to enjoy the stuff you have, like buy new cars and travel and all those things, our country has to grow. That's the only way we get to do everything we get to do. We grew by bringing a gender and a baby boom population in. All of our growth, every single new net job in Canada is going to be filled by somebody who's currently not living in our country. So all of our growth has to come from immigration. We do not produce enough human beings in this country for us to be able to grow. So it has to become everyone's strategy as we start to head into the future. So we're going to dig into this a little bit more, and then I'll completely depress you, and then we're going to maybe take a little break, and then I'll get back to some solutions. So the jobless rate, I think it's 6.3% now, because it went back in the other direction a couple of days ago. So 5% is fully employed. So at 5%, it means that the people you're looking for don't exist in the workforce anymore. This is not the number you need to worry about in Canada now. This is the number you have to worry about, the US number, 4.3. That was as low as 2.8. And the reason why you have to worry about that number right now, because they're coming north of the border to find their people. And they have a new way of doing it, and it's remote work. My daughter will hire 300 people this year. She's a recruiter. She works for a big US firm. She works out of her house in Nova Scotia. She said, Dad, I'm gonna hire 300 people. A lot of them will be in South America. A lot of them will be Canadians. Not a single one will work for a Canadian company. They'll all work remote for an American company, or she said, and some will work for their Brazilian company, but they'll all work remote. And what is happening is we have a way that because every G7 country is in the exact same boat we are. All the G7 countries are gonna start recruiting remote workers to work in for their country, but live in our country. So for the local Tim Hortons or coffee shop or restaurant or retail store or your store, you benefit because we're gonna pay big bucks and they'll shop local, but it doesn't do anything for the Canadian economy from the perspective of this brain drain that we see, kind of heading south of the border. So I live in a fairly affluent neighborhood. During the pandemic, 92% of every house that was sold in my neighborhood were sold to people in from Ontario that moved down to work remotely during the pandemic in an acreage, some distance, fiber connections, gigabit technology, like really, really good place to work remote. When those Ontario companies started to force their employees to come back 2 days a week or full time, most of them just quit. And they picked up jobs for other companies that wanted to hire them remotely. Now when I look at my neighbors, not only do they not work for a Halifax company, they're not even working for Canadian companies most of the time, they're working for US firms. And I always said in Atlantic Canada, we had 3 types of people. People that graduated, fell in love, and moved out here. And they're your drinking buddies. And there are people like you that come from Antigonish, you move out here. And then there were people like me that wanted to stay home, but was okay with traveling. So I do about 100 flights a year, done it my whole life. Doesn't matter what job I had, I was always on an airplane. But there were always people that said, you know what, I'm not doing it. You go out there and make the big money. I'll make 90 grand a year, in my trade, and I'll work in the shipyard, and my kids will know their cousins and play hockey with their friends. And that's the group everyone's targeting right now, is Atlantic Canadians, and not just Atlantic Canadians, you are a picking ground for people hiring remotely. And one of the reasons why Saskatchewan is a picking ground, and I hear it, like, I'm in Vancouver, so say I gotta hire an accountant in Vancouver, and it's $1.8 million to buy a starter home in Vancouver. So I've gotta pay the accountant $150,000 or $175,000. But they could hire that accountant remotely in northern Saskatchewan, where they could still buy a house for $300,000 and pay them half of what they would have to pay someone in Vancouver, and they can work remotely. So provinces like yours, Saskatchewan, and mine, Nova Scotia, we become the picking grounds for richer places like New York or Boston or Silicon Valley to hire people remotely. So basically, attracting talent will become every organization's biggest challenge. And the numbers you want to be terrified are these numbers. So we have 648,000 jobs we can't fill in Canada, people don't exist. But the number you want to be terrified of is 8.2 million in the US, because they're coming for us. And then, they'll use their visas to take our welders and our pipe fitters and our mechanics that go south of the border, but they have other ways of hiring people now they don't have to use up their visas on, and that's remote work. So both ways are gonna be able to pick at people to have us recruit. Just on the immigration numbers, during the pandemic, first year of the pandemic, we had about a net 0. We actually had about negative 5,000 people in net immigrants in Canada. So the federal government will say we had 190,000 people, 185,000 I think, move into Canada. But most experts believe 190,000 actually exited Canada to be with their family during the pandemic. So we had about a net negative 5,000. Second year of the pandemic, federal government will say 420,000 people moved into Canada, but the more accurate numbers was 220,000. The balance were already actually living here. Just the paperwork had lagged behind, so they weren't new net employees. So we have a bit of a catch up from that immigration perspective as well. So those numbers are down, and all of that puts this pressure on, what we kind of see now as quite a severe skill shortage. So, that is the end of the scare the bejeebers part of our presentation. And what I'm gonna do next is, we'll get into some solutions, but maybe we'll take a little break and you guys can go to the washroom and have a cup of coffee and. So we'll do about 10 minutes, does that work for you guys, for a 10-minute break?
Yes, 10 minutes works perfect.
Okay.
My brother-in-law was poached by a company in Houston, and he works remotely up by Calgary there.
Yeah.
And once in a while, he's a pipeline integrity consultant. So once in a while, he'll have to go to the pipelines, but they offered him just an astronomical
Yeah.
amount.
Yeah.
He gets to work from home, and it's completely flex time.
Yeah.
So the only time he has to be at his computer is if they are getting ready for a meeting. But as long as he's getting his work done.
My
He loves
brother-in-law,
that because my brother-in-law, my sister had a baby, so he got to be there for that. He gets to go on vacations, he looks at his calendar, he texts his boss. We've gotten meetings this week, I'm taking off, his boss is like, is all of this done? Yeah, good, see you later.
well, my daughter's the same, she makes 6 figures, and, half the time I call her, I say, where are you at? She goes, I'm at Sobeys, I'm at the park with Lily, our granddaughter, and I'm thinking to myself, like, in my day, and I really have to be careful because I speak on this stuff, so I understand what her needs are, what she wants.
Yeah.
I just can't fathom it myself, that, you know, I would have allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
But I said to her one day, I said, like, you know, do people care whether you're there? She said that, they just care if I get my job done. You know, like, I have a number where she's recruiting people, she said, my boss is happy, the people who report to me are happy, my daughter's happy, my husband's happy, we're all happy, so.
And you can do everything from your phone.
Yeah, and she does.
So like,
Yeah.
if I'm out and about and I have to hop on a Teams call, Carla's done it before, where she's been driving home from Saskatoon and she hops on Teams meetings, like,
Yeah.
it's just, that's the world we live in right now,
I did
for
it,
office jobs.
I did it, well, I travel, so
Yeah.
I did a Zoom call yesterday from my hotel room for an event that I'm doing for a chamber in Prince Edward Island.
Yeah.
I have a Zoom call tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock with the Safety Council group in Alberta that wanna hire me for an event next year, so for me, the Zoom call, the virtual stuff, I love it because I can talk to, you know, I mean, I did it with you guys.
Yep.
It's 10 times better than the phone because I can see your expression, so I know if you're kinda, so from a selling tool, it's, yeah.
It is, yeah, absolutely.
Like, from a sales rep, you know, you can make 10 sales calls by, you know, 12 o'clock on Monday morning, whereas it costs $300 a sales call for a rep to go to do a call. And basically, you can do it from your house.
Exactly. Hey Nathan, what is the minimum age that you guys can hire for apprentices? Is it 16 or is it 18?
Depends, like, that falls into a lot of the companies we work for's policies, so like, lots of them don't want anybody under 18 on site.
Right.
Yeah, but I think there is some, programs with the schools that we can,
Yep.
they can put hours towards
Cause
apprenticeship.
I was just talking with Logan last night, we were having supper, and he was like, I wanna get into a trade.
Oh,
I said,
yeah.
which trade? He was like, probably an electrician, and I'm like, well, then you need to start getting your butt out there
Yeah,
and get
I
your
know
dad to
the
help you with
school
these things.
does some programs where they can put hours towards apprenticeship, and the apprenticeship's now recognizing those hours
Yeah.
as, hours towards their apprenticeship when they get out of high school.
Yeah, cause he's only 14 and he can, I mean, like, I was an apprentice.
Yeah.
Cause when Palmer had his company and we were doing residential, I was going out and helping him. And I said to Logan, I'm like, he knows more about electric stuff than I do.
Yeah.
Now, he's like, can I rewire my room?
Right.
Like, no, because it's not gonna be a code. And when I wanna sell the place, I don't want people wondering what is happening here. But that's like, he wants to get into it.
You know, there is a bit of a shift too right now. I can see people coming back to the trades a little bit. And I think it's working while you're going to school. I think that's a big
I think that's, cause it's what, 8 weeks of school?
a year, yeah, for 4 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but 8 weeks, and most companies cover it.
Like, we just hired 2 kids out of high school. That's the first time we've done that in 10 years. Like, have not seen a kid out of high school.
Half a cup of coffee and it was empty.
Is it out?
Oh, sorry, I cleared it out for a half cup.
Don't worry, there will be some.
We'll be okay.
And we are not here to be in reality. We are a little bit, but we need to keep going about and figure out what we should do. Instead of what we have to do. It's hard to.
I was on it a long time ago, but I still think that.
Eddie, do you want a refill?
Yes, I'd love a refill.
Coffee?
Well, if you bring it up,
Okay,
that's fine.
and I got you a bottle of water there
Oh,
too.
thank you. Oh, thanks.
That's when I got back into it.
Okay, so there's coffee, fresh coffee. Sorry about that. I can't. I might switch to tea. Switch to tea. Yeah. But you know what? So are you doing herbal or?
No, it's, well, sometimes, I use the, it's an Earl Grey, but it's like to do, I don't know what it is.
Oh.
It's yummy.
It's funny, when I do these, and you are a young group, and I always say, you have a great
That's what I was saying.
Well, it's funny, my wife and I say this, when you get married,
It's interesting.
we'll drive here, we'll stop here, we'll go to the after dinner coffee, we don't fly in Ohio, we used to fly in America, so we Yes. Yes. Well, that's my friend said, he said, I would really, he said, I just can't see myself moving into like a condo or anything. That's where we're at. Well, you're great.
So what was, I'm just thinking about like the flexible shifts to probably.
I wrote that down, but maybe we could try and get it.
then we have.
You said that a while ago, when we used to have maybe,
But, no, we did exactly.
Yeah, it's very nice, and it just takes a while, you know, unless you're gonna,
And now,
as a school, it just. Yeah.
Yeah, it took me 3 days to get back.
like I have some.
He was gonna come this weekend, so he finished.
So yeah, I don't
well, we're thinking of evolving to like residential cities and all.
And I just think that's part of the best we can take.
And you wrap your arms around.
And I think it's what we see that it works out, so, you know, that's what
And then I'll need more of you.
Exactly, that's what it's over there. It's a group marketing.
Well, and that's another reason, my kids, own the cars and my So I need my grass and my tools. Another reason why I can't
Jim hired me.
So anyway, Carla, I don't know how they're.
I'm your patient is
All right, are we good to start?
I think so, for the safety of the Duncan and Heidi's making your copy.
Okay, so we will, I'm gonna get you to do a little exercise on your own first. I want you to take a couple notes. And then I'm gonna just get you to kind of get together in a couple of groups here. So your notes are just gonna be, when you think about that impact the age demographics and the amount of people that are retiring, you know, what demographic changes are impacting your industry? So every one of you here are in a different industry. So I want you to think about it, write down a couple notes around it. How are these shifts affecting your ability to attract and retain skilled workers? And what strategy is your organization using or could implement to address this? So I want you to think about these from your perspective, your own company that you work for. And then the next exercise, we're just gonna put you in a couple of groups here. And you're gonna compare notes, like what's happening in your industry versus yours, what's in yours versus. So let's just take like, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes and just on a piece of paper, kind of answer those questions specific to you. We'll go about 30 more seconds. Okay. So now what we're gonna do, I'm gonna put you in a couple of groups here, and we're not gonna spend 10 minutes on this, but I want you to think about common trends that are happening between, say, your industry and the industry of somebody else who's in your group, and then what actions are being taken, what innovative ideas can help manage the skills shortage. So we're gonna make this real simple. So let's just go U4, because that's kind of nice, because we break you guys up a bit. We'll just go U4 here, we'll go U4 here, and then U4 here.
Right on. Who wants to go?
Hey, Eddie, for me, I work with, a lot of trucks and drivers.
So I just speak to my industry, so.
Okay.
That's the main thing for drivers. So, right now, impacting, older drivers versus younger. I have more older drivers.
Yeah, I would
So,
say,
once they're retiring, I'm not sure how that's going to fold out for newer drivers. We can if they're flexibility, maybe we're into a company and want to.
Because the cost to get a 180
That's another thing.
quadruple what they overnight.
Yeah, it's a good thing because of the safety side of things, which is a positive. But yes, a lot of people are very slow. So much.
See, I was gonna get my 180 because I drove a Sentra. Like, I grew up on a farm, that's how we all trained. I was taught how to drive Sentra by my dad, and I was gonna get my 180, and then I realized that I couldn't get in before they increased the cost, and I said, I'm just gonna go, because we were only ever on the back roads, never around a lot of traffic, and I knew what I could do, and driving it for 10 years. But I know a lot of people that want to get their 180, and they're like, I'm not gonna spend $50,000 to get my 180, which is not a thing I'm gonna do. And there's not a lot of programs to help with that funding. It's an upfront cost to buy a computer, so.
I mean, when you look at it, if you really wanna do it, you're going to do it, it's just the same as a young person.
What I would say that's-
Going into university and getting, they're doing what they wanna do, they have to pay a fortune, so.
You know, and then it's just not.
And I do really like the fact that the reason why they have to do all that from the bus accident.
Especially for guys that don't have.
That's the whole thing that came about. You don't want
Looking for something versus
driving or killing people either.
you know, like I said, the motorcycle.
It's tough when you do and then they get it fast.
You got guys that pay bills. A lot of guys come in and drive.
We definitely need to do more figure out
A lot of the places.
It's just the unfortunate thing, you're trying to bring people in.
They're not getting first.
millennials versus
So how do they get that? How do you find out how to don't have any experience that a lot of the manufacturers. So they're.
Stems to the safety side.
Yeah, that was
It can, if you don't, I think, but often, you know, we're trying to work to make sure that the members because the younger generation will not be very good. I don't think we're the older generation will read chips. Yeah. That's what we end up saying, we're not having a Snapchat.
My husband might have to be on.
No, my God, it's awesome. Exactly. My dentist, when I went to my dentist last year, and Eastern Indian woman that came from the country, and was a dentist. But she couldn't, so she was doing dentist assistant cleaning teeth, and she didn't like it, so obviously she said she went back to $5.
Trying to think of what, let me just see. Yes. Yes, it is.
Yep.
Yes.
And that's just trying to get out of that.
Okay.
Yep. The Ukrainian, because we're all, he's doing it, but. It's a lot of work.
Okay. All right, so can I get a little feedback from each group? So we'll start over here. So what did you come up with kind of from an individual then a group perspective?
Basically, we just kind of were talking about my experience. So really, I don't have like a whole lot of impact right now. Right now is more senior drivers than junior drivers.
Okay.
So when that time comes, I'm not sure how that will play out to get the younger drivers interested in doing the job.
Do you have Indian drivers?
I have one Ukrainian driver.
Okay, because India provides almost more truck drivers in Canada now.
Yeah. It takes a lot of work to actually get approved for that too.
Yeah, I know, my friend owns a trucking company.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not just, oh, I'll take that guy, you can't.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, that's kind of where we were and what we were kind of talking about.
Okay, all right. How about this group down here?
I feel like the trends affected both of us very differently.
Right.
So they had more of the boomers sort of leaving the field, and we don't have that as much as the younger generation entering the field. So there was different types
Yeah,
of.
they blew my mind with their problems with communication, because we still write in marker pen on white paper and tape it to the wall, right?
Yeah.
And they do the group chats.
Well, we try to find something that works for everyone, and it seems to be a struggle, so.
Yeah, and my guys wouldn't even do that. It's all set up on our computers. That just didn't even fly. And the other thing I was telling them, for us, when we graduated, every guy was a car guy.
Yeah.
Anybody
Yeah.
worked on their car, everybody was a car guy,
Yeah.
so when they graduated, they went into our businesses. Nowadays, because they can't afford cars, or they're not that interested in it, and to get it at a grade 8 level here, to get to the kids at grade 8, that's still elementary here. We could maybe do it at grade 9. And we have talked to the principal at the school about Lewis Automotive Group, and about us getting into the automotive classes there and doing more work in there, and there's rules against us coming in as a business, doing that kind of thing. And we have also talked to the college. Why can't the college do more training here instead of them having to go to SIAS?
Yeah.
So those questions have been asked. We have no answers as to why
Okay.
we can't do that.
Okay. This group over here.
I think one of the big things we agreed on is that, what new employees place value in is very different from what, older employees do.
Yeah.
Use the example of new jackets or whatever, well, the young people don't care about that, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, we think they're not
Cool.
their style, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, just how do you reward them? And then also, how, they don't learn on their own as much, just because maybe they haven't even been shown at home how to do a task, that type of thing.
Okay.
They require more, again, strategies to what you said about in the first little while to really.
Yeah, on board, yeah. Okay, perfect. This group over here.
We talked a lot at the end about like identifying good talent and then how to engage them instead of just giving them meaningless tasks that I can just go to a different company, do the same meaningless task and get paid more money.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Well, you're a good lead in actually to what engagement is, because you asked about what that is. So, 3 things you want to be focusing your attention on as you go into the future. One is, and this kind of answers to your group here, DEI is getting a really bad rap, and it's getting a bad rap a lot because of Republicans in the U.S. and the whole Kamala is a DEI hire and that type of a thing. But I don't think a lot of people truly even understand what it means. You know, like all they think about is the diversity part of it, but not the equity or the inclusion part of it. So, and I'll give you a simple little example. The equity part of it is giving people the tools they need to effectively do their jobs. And every one of us have a different tool. Now, one of my kind of give backs that I spend quite a bit of time with is working with people with disabilities. So literally last week I spoke to a group of employers on why you should be looking at people with disabilities as people to hire. I mentor people with disabilities, and I work with folks with disabilities in my own province. But my son was diagnosed with ADHD when he was quite young. So it is a form of a disability. In fact, when I work with people with disabilities, that is the disability some people have. So both my children were diagnosed with ADD. When my children were younger, one would have been ADHD, one would have been ADD. They don't do it like that anymore. It says ADD, one could be hyper and one not. So my son wouldn't have been hyper. But because he struggled so much in school, he progressed to print at about a grade 2 level. Like, you know, you would have a hard time making out with what my son prints, but he's extremely well read and very, very intelligent and a prolific writer, but he can't print, but he can write if you gave him a keyboard. So he took 3 post-secondary degrees and diplomas in music. So, which really means that I will support him for the rest of his life. So, we have spent a lot of money on music arts, recording arts. He plays in a band. They won an ECMA. They've got 3 albums out. But in Canada, trying to make a living as a musician. So, what does he do for a job? He's head of security at the community college that he went to as a student. So, an opportunity comes along for another job, and I'm coaching him. And I said, Jay, you have a lot to offer an employer right now. I said, you're well-spoken, you have all your teeth, you know, you're well-educated. And so he goes in to do his interview, and he gets nervous. And he said, the sweat starts to bead on my forehead. And I told him, and I'll tell anyone this, when you're going in for an interview right now, you almost have more to offer than they do. You know, they want you. Like, if you're pretty good at what you do, they want you. So they give him an exercise where they give him a piece of paper that has a paragraph on it, and it's, what would you do in this scenario? So it's a security thing. So what would you do if this happened? How would you handle it? Well, my son manages security for a multi-million-dollar facility with all of the employees. He froze. He got so scared that he said, Dad, this white stuff formed all around my lips. And he said, I'm trying to think of what I would do. And he said, all I could do in that moment was rewrite the paragraph that was above it. He said, I'm taking so long to do it. They asked me if I go out in the hallway while they interviewed the next person. He said, I'm in the hallway and I'm listening to the interview and I'm thinking, I'd hire that guy over me any day. But if they had sat Jason down at a computer and said, what would you do in this scenario? He would have been a prolific writer, and he would. That's the equity part. It's given people the tools they need to effectively, you know, be able to work in the environment, whether it's a disability, whether it's a language thing, or education, or intellectual deficiency, but that we give them the tools. And that's the part that I think a lot of people get wrong in the DEI strategy. And then the other is actually the inclusion part, to get the benefit from what everyone brings to the table. I have one more slide I want to do on this, but it's not where we're going to spend most of our time on employee engagement, because we can engage anybody.
Eddie, with regards to DEI and hiring practices, how can we as hiring managers ask that valuable question to our interviewees employees, whether they need that support or not, because it's a very thin line.
Yeah, I know,
Very
yeah.
gray, like on how you can ask that question. Because if they do not come forward with that information, we will not be able to support them
Yeah.
with that. So all interviews will be the same because of, we
Yes.
want it to be the same,
Yes.
equal opportunity for all. But if they do not come forward with that information, how can we, as hiring managers, ask that important question?
And that would have been the case with my son, right? Like, and I guess if they work for you, you can ask the question. Like if you hire someone and you're asking them, what do I need for you to be effective at your job? That's a little different than an interview. Interview is more difficult because it is hard in an interview because you're there. It's not like you can prepare at that point. They might not even have had the question on something they could have done on a computer at that time. He's in a little room with two people that are interviewing him. So I think in an interview it's more difficult, but I think in a work environment you can have that conversation, and communication is critical in any relationship at work. You can ask them what tools do they need to be able to effectively work together. I'm in Portugal next week presenting to a group. It's a Canadian company. They're taking 90 people to Portugal. I was almost as excited about Portugal as Swift Current. I was really excited about Swift Current, but I said, Portugal's okay as well. So I use, and obviously language is going to be a barrier for me. So, where we would see language. So what I'm doing is I'm actually using ChatGPT. And I use the voice version of ChatGPT, so I can literally take pictures of signs, put it in ChatGPT, it'll translate it. I can speak in English, it'll be translated into Portuguese. They can speak in Portuguese, I'll hear it back in English. So it's a tool that I'm going to use to give me that equity when I'm in another country where I don't speak the language. But you're right, in an interview it's a little difficult because you don't know going in.
I think that, even HR has to evolve as well, and I think it's fair to probably offer our candidates, ahead of time, is there a preference in how you would prefer this interview? Would you rather over computer, or if I present you with some questions, you could fill them out yourself and then we would review them?
That's a great idea.
Even just something like that would help.
Yeah, so maybe you have to coach the employers on how to approach the candidates when they're doing the interviews as well. Employee engagement, I'm gonna dig back into it. And the technology and automation, we're gonna talk a little bit about that, but I wanna go back to DEI for 1 minute before I move on to engagement. So it's, some of you would be touched by an association in Canada called the Food Processors Association. They're the largest association in Canada. They have like 300,000 members, so agriculture, fisheries, you name it. If it touches food, they're probably part of this association. I asked the person who heads up their training, I said, what are you doing in DEI? And one of the things that she said was, we're not gonna call it that, for one thing, we're just gonna call it inclusion. But I think calling it inclusion, you're kind of missing what DEI was, the diversity, equity, and inclusion part of it, but it has gotten a bit of a bad rap. But companies that have strong DEI policy, and I'll throw this out, 25% of all of the people you're trying to hire in Canada right now are immigrants. So it has to be part of every single organization's plan when we look at immigration as part of the future, because it is all of our growth. We will become what's called a super diverse country. If we don't, you'll never get a hip replacer or a cup of coffee. Like it has to be part of the future. But companies have strong DEI policies. What they find is they have more cash in their companies, 30% higher performance, improved workforce innovation, better decision-making, 19% higher revenue, access to more significant talent pools, higher employee attraction retention, and stronger brand. And that's the message I give the CEOs when we talk about DEI, is that because everyone has to be sold on why it's important to them. I remember when we get into engagement, I'm in Ottawa a few years ago, and this lady came up to me and I was talking about engagement. She said, my boss doesn't believe in any of that kind of stuff, engagement. She said, when will they believe in that? And I said, when your boss walks out of the office and the cubicles are empty. And that's what happened, and that's what's driving all of the things we're looking at right now is, and even when it comes to English, because I speak to a group in Nova Scotia, and I might get this wrong, but you rate English on 1 to 10, I think, so traditionally, you would always, is 10 the best and 1 the worst? Yeah.
Canadian language benchmark.
Yeah, so employers would want a certain, maybe 7 to 10 would be what they would look for, and
It's funny that you mentioned that because Canadian citizenship test only requires Canadian language benchmark 4.
yes, but what we're finding from hiring now, that employers are lowering their bar on what's acceptable to hire people. So now I do 100 hotels a year. I seldom ever go into a hotel where the person who comes into my room can speak a word of English. And 6 years ago, most people who come into my room would have been able to, at least salutations, how are you doing today, and have a night. But now it's because their barrier to enter has changed. So that's the language thing is becoming not as big an issue in some industries when they're hiring people. But I want to talk a little bit about engagement because it's something that it impacts everyone. So whether you're from another country, another province, how we engage you kind of is always going to be the same. So back before the economic downturn of 2007, 2008, which really impacted Western Canada, companies were, these were signs that I saw around when people were trying to hire people. And this one I get a kick out of. Subway was offering $100 signing bonus back in 2007 if you hired someone. The catch was you had to stay for 30 days. At the end of 30 days, if you left, you could keep the $100 bonus, and then they would go work for one of the other places that would offer a $100 signing bonus. In seniors care in Nova Scotia now, they make a little bit above minimum wage. So you would have early childhood development in your side, but in seniors care, they're offering $10,000 signing bonuses to pull somebody from one nursing home to go work for another nursing home. So it's the same thing we saw back in 2007, only at but the interesting thing is companies that focused on engagement back then made it through the economic downturn better than their counterparts. And they actually, a lot of them thrived because they had access to talent that they otherwise wouldn't have had access to because some of the bigger players were laying people off. So why is employee engagement critical? So we'll talk about why it's critical, and then I will tell you exactly what it is. So everyone in this room has a sense for what engagement really means, because it is a very misused word. So this is what it's not. The funny thing is, I spoke at a construction company in Ontario. They've about 4,000 or 5,000 employees. They build nuclear power plants, and it was 35 of their VPs for the worldwide operations. And I always say, this is what your boss doesn't look like. There literally was 5 men in the room that looked identical to this guy here. So we still had people that literally look like this person out there, but theoretically, this person at the turn of the century was a man, because we didn't have a lot of women in the workforce before 1935. He was horrible to work for, and he was a tyrant, and he was a bully. And he wasn't a leader, he was a boss. And he is the reasons why we have such strong unions in Canada. It was to literally protect us from him, that we would make it home with our toes and fingers attached, and our rights as a human being was protected. So over time, that style of leadership, a lot of it was pressure. We just didn't accept that style. And I say that, but I'm telling you, especially when I work in like Northern Alberta, we still have tyrants that run job sites and horrible people to work for. But it's less and less now than it would have been even 10 years ago. It evolved into a style of leadership predominantly driven by baby boomers. So baby boomers were more of a selling style of leadership. So rather than one person telling everyone what to do, baby boomers would get together with groups and come up with ideas and push those ideas out to all the stakeholders. Baby boomers love meetings. In fact, baby boomers love meetings so much, they will literally have a meeting about a meeting. They'll say, let's get together on Wednesday. We'll come up with the agenda for Friday's meeting. So they like to get together. They would sell their ideas. They were moving in the right direction, and kind of a thing, and I still hear them say it all the time, but we need our people to be accountable. They're always saying, we need our people to be accountable. Engaged people are accountable. So you don't have to ask them to be accountable. They are accountable. This worked out well for a while until they didn't do what was in the best interest of everyone. And we started, in many cases, arresting them and putting them in prison. So WorldCon and Enron, and we even put Martha Stewart in prison for a while. So we were heading in the right direction, but not where we needed to go. And then this term came along, engagement. So what's so different about engagement in anything that ever came before it? Engagement is actually rooted in science. So it's not a fluffy human resource thing. We're not gonna bang on drums or fall in each other's arms or build bridges out of paper clips and string. Engaged employees make a difference in an organization. You can measure it. If you took an engagement survey in your organization today and you found all your numbers, here's all my numbers, and you move the needle on engagement between this year and next year, it changes everything. It changes your safety numbers, your cost containment numbers, your employee attraction retention numbers, your profitability. Everything changes with engagement. So what does it mean when an employee is engaged? Because this is a really hard one. The biggest part of an engagement is what we call discretionary effort. So discretionary effort means when employees are present, the work they do has a direct correlation with your goals in your organization. So it's discretionary effort doesn't mean that your employees are plugged into their phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It means when they're working, it makes a difference. Now here's where it gets a little bit difficult. Engagement is a feeling. It's an emotional attachment to the outcome of work. It's a feeling, and you've all experienced it. Where you're going home one day, you had a really good day at work, and you feel like $1 million. You close a big deal at work, you have a great conversation, you solve a problem, you just feel like $1 million, and you're driving home and you have that feeling of power, happiness, excitement. That's engagement. So how do you get it? Because that's the key. An employee gets engagement when they leverage their individual strengths. So an individual strength is something an employee does that when they do it, they feel good. It's not necessarily something an employee has to be good at. It's when they do it, they feel good. And that task that they're doing aligns with the goals in your organization. And I'll give you a couple examples. The thing that makes me feel good is this. It's actually standing in front of an audience. I enjoy that. That's my thing. Not many people in this room would trade with me and get up and say, Andy, I got you covered. I'll do the rest of the morning for you. That is my engagement thing. Now, I can do a spreadsheet like nobody's business. I can do drop-down menus, pivot tables. I'm really, really good at a spreadsheet. However, I'd rather poke a pencil in my eye than do a spreadsheet. So it's not a strength. So what we tend to do is we tend to promote people based on things they're good at. And in the case of you have this excellence you want to pass on from one generation to the other. A lot of baby boomers do things they can't stand doing, but they're good at it. They've learned their way through and they got good at doing things that they don't like doing. That's not engagement. Engagement only happens when you're leveraging your individual strengths, you're aligning the strengths with the goals, and you have this, what we call discretionary effort. So how do we find out what our employee strengths are? There's a really simple exercise, and you can do it, everyone in the room can do it with your direct reports. It takes 14 days to do it. We're gonna steal this from Marcus Buckingham. For the next 14 days, ask your employees, before they leave whatever it is they do for the day, to write on a piece of paper, what did I do today that I really enjoyed doing, that made me feel good, that made me feel empowered, that made me feel strong. And then next to that, write down, what did I do today that sucked the life out of me, that made me feel weak, that undermined my success, that I didn't like doing or loathed doing or hated. And the reason why you have to do this for 14 days is you gotta find the pattern. Because I could ask you, what did you do last Tuesday that made you feel good? And you're gonna like, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, right? Like, you're not gonna remember what you did at 10 o'clock, but at 5 o'clock you'll say, oh, 10 o'clock I had a great meeting with so-and-so, solved this problem, did this, did that. So if I went into your organization and we did this thing, at the end of 14 days, your employees came to you and said, sat down with this LeMoine guy, got this all figured out, I know the things I like to do, that's all I wanna do from now on, just the things I like doing. Well, obviously, I wouldn't get much work as a consultant. So Gallup did a study on this. Guess how much time an employee has to be doing things they thoroughly enjoy doing that makes them feel good, makes them feel strong, to become engaged, where the needle starts to move. Guess how much time? 30%. How much? 30%. 30%? You're not too far off. 20%. So 20% of time, people have to do something that makes them feel good. So, now I have a little thing I do, like I eavesdrop on people. I was eavesdropping on a couple guys who are having breakfast this morning. I eavesdrop in the lounge at the airports all the time. And I do it because I like to hear what, especially the men that are traveling back and forth to Fort McMurray and out west, and they're heading east to west. I like to hear what they have to say, what makes them happy. You know, they got Jimmy on the backhoe. I'm 10 times the operator of Jimmy. Why they got him in the backhoe? They didn't give me a chance. I hear these stories. So what you have to figure out with every one of your employees is what is it they do that they really enjoy doing? And you'll be surprised. It might be operating the fryer in the kitchen. It might be digging a hole with a backhoe. It might be interacting with a client. But find out what their strengths are and then say to yourself, what's the goal? What are we trying to achieve? And how do we align that strength with what we're trying to achieve in our organization? And that's where the magic happens. And if you do that, you'll start to move the needle. So if you've never done an employee engagement survey before in your life, you should do one. And I'll tell you, I know all the reasons why people don't do it. One is they could be expensive. One time they were. Like Hewitt's Best Place to Work survey or Blessings White or Gallup, they're all pretty expensive. But for $500 you can get a Survey Monkey yearly subscription. They have a pretty good employee engagement survey there. You can customize it if you want. It's anonymous. Send it out to your staff and you got yourself an employee engagement survey for $500. But I know the biggest reason why people don't do it, they don't want to know. I think employers don't want to know. They don't want to know why their employees are unhappy because they don't think they can do anything about it. And so if you've never done one, you should do one, especially in 2024, because you got to know why your people are leaving. And I'll tell you, just be upfront with people. Say, look, we're going to do an employee engagement survey. We're not really sure what we can do about this. We just got to get a baseline. We got to know what you guys are thinking. And then, I'll tell you what'll bubble to the top. And you guys covered it when you were doing your little breakout session. It's going to be communication. I've read at least 150 employee engagement surveys of Canadian companies, and I will tell you, 90% of them say that you're not communicating enough within your organization. Your employees don't feel that management is talking to them enough, they know what's going on. And part of the problem is, it's that old scenario, if I'm 62 talking to someone who's 22, I may as well have that conversation with a squirrel. You have to communicate in a way your employees want to hear the message. So if you have a younger workforce, they will tell you your corporate email system is too slow. They'll want WhatsApp or instant messaging. And if you're communicating with someone 60 years old, they want you to pick the phone up and tell them. So everyone in your organization wants to hear the message in a different way. And every generation is different on the way that they like to receive. But if you do the exercise, you'll start to move the needle. Does that give you a little bit of insight what it means? Okay.
I just have one comment about the survey for 14 days. There's also what we call the survey burnout. So probably a team member of mine would just say that I've already answered that survey yesterday. Why would I need to answer that today again?
So a survey is different than the 14-day exercise. A survey you would do once a year. So one time they would say you should do an employee engagement survey every 2 years, and then they moved it to every year. Some companies do them every 6 months. This exercise for 14 days is just to identify their strengths, and it's a one-time thing. You're gonna sit down with your direct reports and you're gonna say, I want you to be happier at work. I want you to be doing more things that make you feel good at work. So for the next 14 days, I need you to help me to identify what that is. So what are they doing every day that makes them feel good? And then if you look at it and you go, what do they do that makes you feel good? And you get them to do more of that stuff, you're gonna move the needle. But if you get them doing a bunch of stuff that disengages them, one of two things will happen. They'll quit or they'll become unengaged. So it's good for you to know, but it's also good for them to know, because I'll tell you, in my particular case, it was a conversation I had with myself walking through Scotia Square Mall when I was in my 40s. And I said to myself, I said, Eddie, you got everything everybody wants. I was senior vice president of a large aerospace company, and I was wearing an $800 suit, I had a yacht, cars, exotic vacations, luxury home, and I said, why are you so unhappy? And what happened was I got doing really good at doing things I hated doing every day. So for me, I had to identify, what am I doing that I dislike doing every day? Because I don't think I would have survived to be 62 years old if I hadn't have figured that out and taken a different career path. So it's for their benefit and yours to identify what their strengths are. So, Towers Watson does this survey every year where they look at the best of the Fortune 500 companies, and 9%, so in the lower quadrant, but all good companies, operating margin is 9% for companies in the lower quadrant, 14% if they're engaged, so the higher quadrant, but they're all good companies. But if you engage, enable, and empower people, you can get as high as 27% operating margin. So 27% higher profits, 50% higher sales, 50% higher customer loyalty, 38% above average productivity. I'm gonna fly through this next section because I wanna spend some time on the generational piece. So, I'll give you the slides, but I wanna whet your appetite on why this is important. So, if you look at the current workforce in North America right now, 53% of people are not engaged when they show up for work. So you might think that's really bad, but they're actually not bad people. These don't mean that you're not getting your money's worth, they're just not your rock stars. So the 53% that are not engaged, they're people that trade dollars for time. You pay them 10 bucks an hour, not 10 bucks an hour, you pay them $25 an hour, you get $25 an hour back. Like, you know, they're just not, they're not your rock stars, but they're putting them on. We need them to keep our businesses working. They're your everyday employee. 30% are engaged. They're your rock stars. They're the ones that are knocking it out of the park. They're your best employees. 17% of the workforce are what we call actively disengaged. So those are employees that quit a long time ago, but they still show up every Monday morning for work. So I want to dig into this just a little bit so you understand what that means. Your best employees, your rock stars, that 30% actually do 60% of the total productivity in the labor market. And you know that because you know you have go-to people in your organization that if you need something done, I'm gonna get Jimmy to do it, because Jimmy will do it even if Jeffrey is sitting on the bench, because Jimmy will do it right, he's just gonna have to fix Jeffrey's stuff. So they're your best employees, kind of like the 80-20 rule in sales. You know, 20% of your reps do 80% of your business, and in fact, it's fairly valid when you look at it. The disengaged group, that 53% also do 60% productivity. So anyone in the room that's good with numbers, I'm losing credibility because you're saying, well, you can't have 120% productivity. But basically what I'm telling you is this group here, this disengaged, it takes twice as many of them to do the same amount of work. This is productivity, so we're measuring productivity, not payroll here, so we're measuring productivity. This group here, the actively disengaged are actually getting negative 20% productivity. So most organizations have people that are tearing your business down when the rest of you, so they're burning opportunities. You know, in the sales side, somebody comes in, they do a horrible job, they go buy a car somewhere else. You know, from a mechanical point of view, they take too long to do it, or they send it out, it's shoddy work, it ends up coming back, and so there's a cost to it. So I wanted to dig deeper into these numbers. So here's what it means from a payroll perspective. Your best employees, you're getting 90 cents on the dollar from a payroll perspective. That's the best you're ever gonna get out of a human being. So what does that mean? That means they'll take the odd sick day, they might come in late now and again, they might be on social media, but no human being will give you a dollar for dollar in payroll. But there's two numbers you're managing. This is the amount of time they're actually working, so that's the amount of time they're driving the bus, digging the hole, banging on a keyboard, whatever it is they do. This is the productivity number. From a productivity perspective, you're getting 3 or 4 times what you're paying them from a productivity perspective, but from a payroll perspective, you're getting 90 cents on the dollar. So the only way you get a buck is AI. AI wouldn't take a break. This one here, you're getting 70 cents on the dollar. So they'll take more time off, they'll dip into the benefits package more, they'll more gossiping, and this group here, you're getting 50 cents on the dollar. They take every sick day like it's a sense of entitlement, they come in late, they go home early, they undermine success with gossip. So now if I'm in a large audience and I'm looking out at half round tables and they all represent businesses, when I describe this person, 30% of the tables, without a doubt, somebody at the table will whisper in somebody else's ear and they'll giggle. And I know exactly what they said, the name of the person. Oh my goodness, that's Jimmy. Jimmy takes every hunting season off like it's vacation. Susan takes every sick day like it's a sense of entitlement. So my question always is, if you knew you had someone on your team that you're getting 50 cents on the dollar from a payroll perspective and negative 20% from a productivity perspective, why would you even keep them? And I know all the reasons now, you know, like union environment, expensive to terminate, them, can't find anyone else. But the bottom line is, you're always gonna have some of these in your organization. Sometimes they literally own the business, so they undermine success, but you know, they're the owners. We saw that play out on national television with Rogers. Imagine working in a Rogers organization when they're literally trying to have each other arrested and put in prison. So you would have some actively disengaged family members. But the bottom line is, you want to spend your time here. You want to nurture this group. You want all your policies to be around your best employees, and you want them to help you move people into this group here, and move them up from here, and just minimize the damage this group is doing. You know, if you can terminate them, that's a good thing, but you can't always touch these people, but that's the group that you wanna concentrate on. This group here, 15% of them would consider leaving you, so there's not a big turnover in this group. A little higher now because people are offering ridiculous amounts of money for people to leave. This group here, 85% of them are completely open to leaving you. So the more you can get them to move over here, the more capacity and productivity you're building out of them, the less likely they'll leave, the more likely they'll recommend your place as a place to work. Engaged employees will recommend it as a place to work. Capacity building means you're moving people up in this direction. And from a safety perspective, engaged employees are 5 times less likely to have a safety incident, and a safety incident by a disengaged employee is 6 times more expensive. So I do a safety talk on safety culture, and we kind of mirror in what's happened. Molson in Canada had $1.5 million to the bottom line in saving safety incidents by increasing employee engagement within their organization. So it's, you know, one of the byproducts. I want to talk just a speck about AI, and then I want to get into the generations. I think every organization, every industry right now, you should be looking at technology. And you know, there's 3 kind of areas you should look at technology: your most dangerous jobs, your dirtiest jobs, and your most disengaging jobs. So what of those jobs can you start to automate? World Economic Forum says that about 85 million jobs will be replaced by 2025. Most experts now believe that 40% of all jobs will be replaced within the next 9 years, all jobs. I was in a session the other day in Ottawa. There's a CEO in the room, and he said, we have AI writing hundreds of millions of lines of code. He said, we can see where we're not gonna need a programmer in a couple of years. So you really wanna get on the AI and just, even if you get on and write a country song, like get in there and start learning how to use technology and AI, see where it'll fit into your industry. We use it in our business every single day. We use it to write proposals, we use it to write email marketing campaigns, like we have it do all kinds of stuff. It's like I hire 10 people to have AI. We just landed a deal that was 100% based on what we did with AI. So it's something that every industry should be looking at. And you know, like the self-checkout, these are all steps that we're taking, because we have about 8 Canadians supporting everyone retired. We're gonna head to a place where only 2 will support everyone retired. And the only way we're gonna get there is through technology. So you're either using AI or you're hiring people that understand AI. And I think that's where Z generation will really benefit us in the future, because that will be the generation that will walk in the door and truly understand AI. So this actually works out pretty good. I have about 25 minutes. And if I go a little bit up past noon, I'll just cut some off of the other talk. 5 generations is a big deal. It is a big deal. It is the biggest disruptor in the workforce. I spoke at McDonald's conference last year, and they have 5 generations that work at McDonald's, but they actually have 7 generations that walk in the door as customers. So, you know, when we look at all the different generations, it's not just how do we work with them, but how do we interact with them when they're our clients or our bankers or our teachers that teach our kids. Like, how do we understand the needs of each of these generations? So in closing the engagement gap, getting people more engaged, there's 3 things you want to look at. One is getting to know them, we'll dig into this a little bit. The other one is developing, and that's aligning their strengths with your goals, that's engaging your employees. And the other thing is, and I always like to stress this to people, you have a big responsibility as leaders in your organizations to inspire and motivate people. I mean, I can sell you a book that will help you become more inspired and motivated, but the reality is, you set an example for your employees, and they watch everything you do. They watch, you know, what you say on social media, what time you show up for work, what you eat for lunch, how you dress, the way you interact with your customers, and everything you say is telling them it's okay for them to act this way. So if you look up the Eddie LeMoine brand, if you Google me, you'll find thousands and thousands of pictures. Almost every one of them, I have this identical black jacket on, normally always with a white shirt. I've got about a dozen identical suits, 32 white shirts. I wear my white shirts 5 times, and then I give them to people that are going for job interviews. I dress casual today because I just thought you would allow me to be a little bit more casual. But I love a rum and coke, but you'd be hard pressed to find a picture of me with a rum and coke, and I never say anything political on any of my feeds. But I sit down with my friends and we have great political conversations. Because I know the value of my brand, and your brand, that's all you have. You know, how you present yourself to people around you, that's really, really important. So protect your own personal brand. And I always think of from a social media perspective, you know, when you're on Facebook, you're not Facebook's customer, you're Facebook's product. They're selling you. They're selling you to advertisers, and it's an echo chamber. Whatever you're looking for in Facebook, they're feeding it back to you. So be very cautious of what you're doing in social media, the impact that has. But I want to, when we look at getting to know people, there's 3 things in getting to know people. One is you got to get to know people based on their gender. So if we look at men and women working together in the workplace, I mean, you'd have to live under a rock to realize that even though we've been doing this since the 1930s, we haven't figured it out. We haven't figured out how to effectively work together. But if you and I work together, your values, beliefs, what's important to you, the way you communicate, your style is going to be very different than me. So if you're my boss, you have to figure me out. If I'm your boss, I have to figure you out. But if we're colleagues, we have to figure out how to effectively work together. So, you know, that's the first thing in getting to know people. Now, from an immigration perspective, when I talk about culture here, I mean immigration, not the culture in your organization. You know, 25% of the workforce right now are immigrants, and every single new net job is going to be hired somebody who is currently not living in our country. It has to become everyone's strategy in your organization. But the one I want to have a little bit of fun with is the generation piece. There's a thing in DEI called unconscious bias, where we have opinions about things. Maybe we have opinions about people who come from a certain country or a certain part of our country. What are Cape Bretoners like? What are Newfoundlanders like? What's an age like? Like, we gave millennials a bad rap for years and years, and yet, you know, you're in this room now. So we're gonna pick on them. We're gonna have a little bit of fun with this because I can. I'm at the front of the room and I'm allowed to have a little bit of fun with this. So, but here's what I want you to think about from an age perspective. Not your generation, you already figured you out. I want you to think about the generation you're not. So if you're 25 years old or 27 and you're managing somebody, I mean, what's your oldest employee, would you say is?
He's 70 now.
Yeah, so how do you manage somebody that's 70 years old if you're, you know, 30 years? And I think the hardest people right now are X generation. Because I think X generation, you show up at work and you gotta manage someone 65 and 16. So how do you effectively communicate across, understand the needs of all of those generations? So mature generation, you would have an employee. Not a lot of people have an employee that would fit in that category. Boomers are 46 to 64. Who in the room would be X generation, 65 to 79? So you're a small group, which is really interesting because we see a larger representation of X generation. Gen Y, 1980 to 95, so that's millennials. You know, see how many of, like, I'm telling you, like 5 years ago, we wouldn't even invite you guys out. So look how far you've come as a generation. Any Gen Zs in the room? Any Gen Zs born after 1995? Anyone have Gen Zs working for them?
Yes.
Yeah, so the Gen Zs I'm going to talk about here are more your children than your employees. Your employees that are Gen Zs almost have more of the characteristics of a younger millennial right now, so, but, so if you ever Google anything on, it does a drop down. So I'm sitting in a hotel room, and I'm like, well, what are people saying about the generation? So if you do what is mature generation, that's all you get, matter. So they actually do matter. They control more than $1 trillion worth of wealth in Canada. There are many people's clients. They put a huge burden on the healthcare system. There are bankers, in a lot of cases, so they still have. When you do baby boomers, you go, why are they called that? Why are they important in hospitality management? Because it is a big curtain call. Why are they particular interested geologists? They are the self-centered generation, so they are the me generation. Baby boomers always said millennials are the me generation, but it's actually the baby boomers. Now, X generation, it's interesting, you're a small little generation, but why are you the best, the forgotten generation, the lost generation? The reason why you're the forgotten and lost generation is you're actually between two larger generations. So you have the baby boomers on one side and the millennials on the other, and you're a small generation in the middle. And you are the first generation severely impacted by the birth control pill. So many of you, your parents didn't even want you, just kind of snuck through. So you're what we call the sandwich generation. Your parents were very busy. Now, millennials, other than, and I'm sure it's still baby boomers Googling this, so why are they categorized as lazy? Because I don't believe it's valid, but I still think, because I think every time a baby boomer looks at a young person that are probably a Z generation, they think they're a millennial. Like, I don't think baby boomers have figured out what a Z generation is, so they're looking at kids and they think they're lazy, so they think millennials are lazy. You're big, you're important, you matter, you're the best, but you're still gonna. But it's interesting when you bring up Z generation, because Z generation is getting all the bad rap that we gave millennials a couple of years ago. Worst generation, the dumbest generation. So it's always the last one in, right? We always criticize their hair, their music, whatever it happens to be, and you can go back to the 1700s, would be the same. So I want you to think about the characteristics of each generation. There's what's called an outlier. So when you were born has a massive impact on your personality. But there will be people within a generation that don't fit in the generation. And it could be a cultural background. You could come from another country where you could be a millennial but have the characteristics of an X generation. So a good leader would understand the unique characteristics of their generation. Like, I'm actually a baby boomer, and I identify more with the characteristics of an X generation. So a good leader that leads me would say, well, Eddie's more like an X generation. He would have more of those characteristics. But millennials and Z generation, you're what we call late bloomers or late starters. So for example, I fell in love with my wife when I was 15 years old. I went through high school with her and I proposed to her in university. We got married when we were 20 years old. We had children in our late 20s. You would be hard pressed for a Z generation to get married now at 21 years old. A Z generation might want to get married, but the pool of people who would want to marry that person at 21 is very slight. So, because most people now will get married, 27, 28, 29 and have children in their 30s. So the outlier is the one who wants to get married at 21, but the reality is the rest of the group are not. So you're always going to have these outliers. Now, the mature generation understand duty, sacrifice better than any generation because they grew up during the Depression, or they were children of people who grew up during the Great Depression. And because of that, they understand scarcity and lack better than any generation. And because of that, they're fantastic savers, they're incredibly loyal. If your granddad was a Ford man, he's a Ford man till the day he dies. They'll put a Ford logo on the front of his coffin when they bury him. If he shops at the co-op, he'll shop at the co-op his whole life. If he went to a certain barber, he'll go to that barber his whole life. They have this great level of loyalty, and they spent their whole life avoiding scarcity and lack, and that's why they're such fantastic savers, because they didn't charge up debt. They were bullied in the workplace. They worked for a boss, not a leader, and they're very comfortable with a newspaper in printed form and picking the telephone up and calling them. And they're actually quite comfortable with media now if it's in the form of like FaceTime or something like that. They're not really more into like Instagram or LinkedIn, but they do like to communicate in the spoken word. This generation obviously haven't been in the workplace for a while, but they still have a lot of clout. Now the baby boomers are really, not just because I'm a baby boomer, we are a very fascinating generation to watch them go through their careers. So they are absolutely the me generation, incredibly self-centered. In fact, if you were a fan of Oprah, you can watch the baby boomers grow up. Because when Oprah first started in her career, the baby boomers were a psychological mess as a generation. Number one drug prescribed to baby boomers was Prozac. And it's only going to be surpassed by one drug, and guess what it is?
Marijuana.
You know what? I have a funny feeling you're right. I have a funny feeling it's Ozempic, and I got to research it, because all of our data up until just the last year or so, where every time I get in front of an audience, they say that, it was Viagra. So once they went off of their Prozac, they didn't immediately go on to Viagra, but they were a generation that always looking for something to make them happy, right? So Viagra was, but Ozempic is that, I believe, and I'm gonna have to check that, every audience now, if it's a big audience, 5 or 10 people will say Ozempic. But, so when Oprah was younger and the baby boomers were on this Prozac, she would bring an expert in. Anyone remember who that was? Dr. Phil. And it was, baby boomers' psychological issues were so prevalent that Dr. Phil got his own 1-hour show, catering specifically to baby boomers. But over a period of time, baby boomers went off the Prozac, they became great leaders, coaches of the hockey teams, great managers, and something else started to happen to the baby boomers, their health started to fail. And Oprah brought in someone else. Can anyone remember who that was? Brought in Dr. Oz. And Dr. Oz got his own 1-hour show. And it's not uncommon for, especially those of you that are younger, it's not uncommon for you to sit down with a baby boomer over a lovely meal, and they will tell you some disgusting thing that's happening to part of their body like you can. So they love to share what's going on. You wouldn't believe what I have growing, they just love to have that kind of information. So in the workplace, baby boomers promote based on time. So they're more about tenure, putting that time in. They struggled with remote work because they like to see a bum in a seat. They have a hard time when people went home, they weren't really sure if they were working. They're workaholics. And you had said something about we just want to reward ourselves. So I'm in Vancouver a couple weeks ago, and I'm in a boardroom, and there's a CEO of a large home builder in the room, and he's my age, his early 60s. A lot of younger people in the room. We're talking about the difference between what young people want and what he wants. And he said something that I've often thought, and I have a schedule that I don't think any 25-year-old could keep up to me. Like I do red eyes, walk off an airplane, give a speech. I can go days without sleeping and fly from one place to another. It's the way I live my life. But he said it to the group, and I was really he said, I look back at my life, and I do the exact same thing. He said, I look back at my life, and I lived 2 lifetimes in my life. He said, I've worked so hard, I've lived 2 lifetimes. And it's not uncommon for a baby boomer at the end of the week to say, I put 70 hours in this week. My health is failing, my spouse doesn't speak to me anymore, the kids can't stand me, but I put 70 hours in. It was a badge of honor for that generation to say that they put that time in. But he said, I'm at a place right now where I want to go for a ride on a bicycle with my friends, but he said, my back is so sore, my hands are so sore, I can't hold on to the handlebar. He said, because I burnt myself out. And and he was saying in the defense of the young people in the room, he said, I get it. I get why you don't want to be like we were, because we gave it all to work, and now we're at a place in our life where we don't have anything left for the one time in our life when we should be enjoying ourselves. So this generation, hours is important. We literally give a baby boomer a watch when they retire. I mean, it's the one time they shouldn't care what time it is. I walked into my dad one time, and he's in just a sour mood. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning. I said, Dad, what's wrong? He said, it's 11 o'clock, and the newspaper isn't here yet. It should have been here at 10:30. He said, what kind of a racket are these kids running now? Can't even deliver a paper on time. So, because time was important to him. This generation really comfortable with email, telephone, newsletters to get information out to the site. Hard workers, you can literally draw a line between baby boomers and X generation, everything changed. When the X generation came along, X generation, when I say skeptical, reluctant, self-sufficient, I actually mean it in a nice way. You didn't like what you saw. You didn't like the way the baby boomers treated the planet. You didn't like WorldCon, Enron, the corruption that you saw. So, and you shunned the baby boomers' do or die attitude about putting time in. You're more about getting the job done. Now, I had a conversation with my daughter. She's a millennial the other day, and I call her, and she works remotely. I said, Sasha, where are you at? She said, I'm at Sobeys. I said, Sasha, where are you at today? I'm at the park with Lily. I said the other day, I said, Sasha, like, when do you work? Like, because I was the guy working 67, and I still am. She said, Dad, all they care about is the results. They don't care where I'm at. They just care about the results. She said, my bosses are happy, my employees are happy. She said, that's just the way that I work. So when this generation came along, they actually shunned the baby boomers' do or die attitude about putting time in. You're the first generation that came along and said, let's just get the job done. So give me a job to do and I'll do the job. I might want to do it at home. You and I had this conversation last night. Your time becomes valuable and where you spend it. Do you need to spend 3 hours a day in Toronto commuting to downtown Cork? Statistically, Gallup did a study on this, that companies that can engage employees in a remote environment are getting 2.5 hours per day more productivity out of their employees than if they actually came to work. Because they're measuring productivity as opposed to how much time they actually spend sitting in their seat. Now, you guys probably don't know this, but you took social media to a whole other level. X generation, it's not about puppy dogs and pussycats. It's about electing a president, the Arab Spring, making massive movements in the world. And there's a singer from Southern Ontario. Everyone thinks he's from Halifax, but he's actually from Southern Ontario by the name of David Carroll. He would have definitely been out this way. He played in a band called Sons of Maxwell. They're kind of like one of those drinking bands that you want to go to the bar and drink. And so not a lot of people know who that is. Even in Southern Ontario, they don't know what the band is. But a lot of people know David Carroll because he put a YouTube video out a couple of years ago called United Airlines Broke My Guitar. And it was, he was leaving Halifax going to Chicago. He was on a United flight. He saw them throw his guitar into the belly of the plane. And when he got to Chicago, the neck was broke. Now it's a Taylor guitar, actually on the same guitar that he has. And it's about a $3,000 guitar. And the price of a guitar is not the important thing. It becomes part of your soul. So if you're a guitar, I have 2 or 3 guitars, they're important to you. So he went after United Airlines for about a year. They wouldn't fix his guitar. And finally, he said, I'm going to write a song with you and put it on YouTube. They said, good luck with that. So in 9 days, 15 million people watched the video. 15 million people. In the long run, they fixed his guitar. They used that YouTube video as a customer service training tool for the power of social media. And they gave $6,000 to a scholarship fund for young aspiring artists. This was your generation. You're a very talented generation. You communicate well. You're very well educated. Biggest problem with your generation? You're too small. You're not going to handle what's coming. And as more and more of the baby boomers exit the workforce, you do not have the numbers to be able to fill those holes, nor do many of you even want the role. So even when you talk about passing that knowledge down, some of the stats say as high as 46% of this generation are not interested in being promoted. They're more about spending time with their family and having a better home life balance than just taking the next job. Because baby boomers always felt that they weren't moving forward, they were moving backwards. This generation, if they're happy with the paycheck they have, their family time, then they're okay with that. This generation, really strong with technology, instant messaging, WhatsApp, Instagram, you're good across the board. You're moving away from Facebook. I said to my daughter, I said, Sasha, I don't see you on Facebook anymore. She goes, Dad, Facebook's for old people. She said, I don't get on Facebook. It's all politics. I just don't get on it. I sometimes will post, really happy to be speaking in California today. My mother, who's 89 years old, will post underneath it, "You're looking a bit skinny, are you eating enough?" And I'm like, "Mom, you're not supposed to put that stuff on my Facebook feed." So people have different mediums that they live in. You're a really good generation. You can't handle what's coming. Our savior is really the millennials. The millennials are a very talented generation. Now, when I say coddled, idealistic, most managed, I mean that in a kind way as well. It has nothing to do with you as a generation. It has everything to do with your parents. Your parents were helicopter parents or push parents, whatever you want to call them, but they never left you out of their sight. They put you in organized lunch programs, organized after school activities, organized weekend events. And because of that, when you hit the workplace, in fact, if you have a child now, would be a Z generation now, but if you have a child now, and you let them out of your yard, there's actually a word for it. Do you know what it is? If your children leave the yard.
Not a clue.
Good farming community like this, you should know that. Free range.
Oh.
So free range children. There was a first a criminal case in the US where a parent let a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old walk 1 mile to the park. They prosecuted them with abandoning their children. So now I grew up in a place where mom would simply just let us go, and then at the end. Now you're in a rural area. I'm sure it's very different than some of the cities. But I mean, there are places where it probably isn't safe to let your children leave. But because of this, I don't believe there's a human resource manager in the country that hasn't been called by some of these parents and saying, "You're not managing little Jimmy properly." Like, that's not the way he responds. So over time, I would always have one up it, right? And it doesn't matter. I have a buddy of mine that runs a motorcycle place. He said he recently had a young guy right out of school, right out of the technical school, come in for the interview with his father. His father came into the interview. So I don't think there's a human resource manager that hasn't been called by some of these parents. I don't think there's a professor at the school that hasn't been called. One time you'd never call a professor in a university. But there's always one-ups. So I had one, I'm in Newfoundland, 85 human resource managers of large organizations. And this lady came up to me afterwards, and I won't say, what company they work for, but they're based in Alberta and they have a lot of airplanes. So she came up to me and she said, "I had one that tops that." She said, "We actually had a candidate's parents show up for an interview without the candidate." So, and we had one just literally 3 or 4 months ago in Ottawa, where a gentleman said they're hiring this kid out of school. He was a brilliant programmer. He said, "We go through all of the steps of the interview. Thursday's the last interview. He's going to come in, they're going to make the offer." He said they go out to the front desk and there's an older gentleman standing beside him. And they said to him, "Can we help you?" He said, "I'm his father." He said, "Oh, congratulations for hiring your son today." He said, "It's only taking about 20 minutes. We're just going to sign some papers. You wait here, you guys can go celebrate for lunch." He goes, "No, I'm coming in." They go, "Well, you're what?" He said, "I'm coming in." He said, "What do you mean you're coming in?" He said, "Well," he said, "you're hiring my son because he's brilliant, right?" He goes, "Oh yeah." He said, "Well, he's brilliant, but he does not know how to negotiate a contract." He said, "I'm coming in. I want to negotiate his contract." And he literally went in and negotiated his son's contract. So it's not about you necessarily. It's really about what your parents did. You're incredibly talented. You're great communicators. You communicate well again across all generations, because many of you had a really good relationship with your grandparents, with other generations before you didn't have. Like my children, who are millennials, had an unbelievable relationship with both sets of grandparents, which I believe my grandchild will have that relationship with me. You're very technical, so you're going to help us get to where we need to go in the future, and you're finding your way. You're big in numbers. You're finding your way. We see you as a lot of leaders. So if I go back to baby boomers put work first, home second, work first, geography second. If I go to X generation puts family first, work second, family first, geography second. If we look at millennials put work first, everything else second, or everything else first, work second, and they want to be having fun at work. So they're looking for purpose at work, and that's why the younger your workforce, the more important that finding purposeful work happens. So, and I wanna show you because who was doing the advertising? They said advertising that, yeah, you were talking about advertising to different generations, right?
Yeah.
So this is an ad for baby boomers. So think about baby boomers. Materialistic, symbols of success, work hard, don't take time off. If you've got a baby boomer working for you, you're probably sitting down with them in December and going, you got like 3 weeks vacation you didn't use. What are we gonna do with it, right? Because it's just the way baby boomers are. They're scared to take time off because we might rearrange the deck chairs. So they just stay there, right? So this was a Cadillac ad that ran toward one of the big football games a couple of years ago. It was geared 100% toward baby boomers, but it got slammed by the media, the ad did. Completely missed the message to everyone else in the world, but it didn't to the baby boomers. So Ford came out with an ad, and Ford's ad was geared toward X and Y generation, and probably even Z generation if you think about it from now. And what I want to show you is the two ads are identical. Every motion the actor in the Cadillac ad, Ford's actor does the exact same motion. Everything is identical except their message is completely different. But right down to the very last word he says is Nespa, and she says Nespa. And he was even criticized for saying Nespa in his ad. But the reason why I want to show them to you is because I want you to realize how different we are as generations. So this was the Cadillac ad.
Why do we work so hard? For what? For this? For stuff? Other countries, they work, they stroll home, they stop by the cafe, they take August off. Off. Why aren't you like that? Why aren't we like that? Because we're crazy, driven, hard-working believers, that's why. Those other countries think we're nuts. Whatever. Were the Wright brothers insane? Bill Gates, Les Paul, Ali. Were we nuts when we pointed to the moon? That's right. We went up there, you know what we got? Bored. So we left. Got a car up there, left the keys in it. Do you know why? Because we're the only ones going back up there, that's why. But I digress. It's pretty simple. You work hard, you create your own luck, and you gotta believe anything is possible. As for all the stuff, that's the upside of only taking 2 weeks off in August. Nespa?
So, rich white guy, older rich white guy, no reference to a hybrid car, no reference to the environment. You know, everything that car symbolizes to him was only work really hard, don't take any time off, you can own a Cadillac. So this was the ad that Ford came out with as a rebuttal. So Cadillac pulled the ad pretty fast. Ford came out and they had some fun with them. And this is geared toward, like, you will not have a baby boomer come to you and say, what's your green policy? But you might have an X generation or a Z generation or a Y generation asking you where your green policy is. So this was the Ford ad.
Why do I work so hard? For what? For this? For dirt? Other countries, they work, they stroll to the market and buy locally grown food. Locally. Why aren't we like that? Well, more and more of us are like that. Because we're crazy entrepreneurs trying to make the world better. Some people might think we're nuts. Whatever. Me, I collect food scraps from restaurants, manure from zoos, manure. Do you know why? To keep this stuff out of landfills and use it to make good, rich dirt. That's why. Yeah, look, it's pretty simple. You work hard, you believe that anything is possible, and you try to make the world better. You try. As for helping the city grow good, green, healthy vegetables, that's the upside of giving a damn. Nespa.
So, I mean, she nailed it, right? Green car, buy local, take care of the environment. And it just goes to how different we think as a generation, you know, what a baby boomer would think versus what other generations think. I want to just touch a little bit on Z generation. Every generation has an addiction. So the mature generation, their addiction was cigarette smoke. In fact, doctors prescribe cigarettes to reduce stress. And if you ever watch the show Netflix, The Crown, when the king is dying at the beginning of the series, it's after a heart transplant and he's chain smoking in his bed. So it was completely acceptable. Everybody smoked. Baby boomers are addicted to work. That was their addiction. It cost them marriages, health, and so on. X generation and millennials, you kind of fit a lot in the same category. You're big drinkers. Like you brought alcohol to a whole other level. I remember going to the liquor store with my dad when he was little, and you would go to a counter and you would order the liquor and they would go out and they'd bring it out. I mean, now you go into sprawling liquor stores with all kinds of wines and fuzzy drinks and all these things. And there's even a term for millennial mothers called wine moms. So a wine mom is a mother who puts her baby down, pours a glass of red wine, sits down, has a glass of wine. There's a new term in Canada called weed moms. So weed mom, you put your baby down, you have a gummy or smoke a toke or something, and you sit down and relax. This generation, Z generation, are actually addicted to technology. And there's almost more addiction centers in the Asian Pacific now for children addicted to technology than any other addiction center. In fact, a study out of the University in California said that parents, on average, now some people get offended by this, and it probably wouldn't be anyone in this room because you're in a more rural environment. But on average, the study they did at the University of California, they said that parents spend less than 35 minutes a week talking to their children. So it's not giving them an iPad, it's not watching them play basketball or hockey, it's literally having a conversation. And they're spending 55 hours a week on social media. And they said the generation is being raised by each other and institutions. So, you know, I know from my own granddaughter, we have way, way more than 55 minutes, you know, or 35 minutes talking to. But this generation, you know, if AI doesn't replace your job, this generation using AI will replace your job. Like, you know, this generation, when they get to the workplace, they're gonna understand and embrace artificial intelligence and technology like nobody's business. So, and I think in the last Chef Ramsay show, didn't the Z generation actually win that one? The Celebrity Chef one, I think Z was the, so really smart, well-educated, great communicators. You just gotta figure this generation out. And they are the most underemployed generation in Canada. And within Z generation, 17% unemployment. And we're not hiring our kids as they're coming out of school, so it's one that you really want to target. So just a recap, and then we'll wrap up. We'll start lunch, and then I'm just going to keep working because that's what I do. Because I'm a boomer. So if we look at boomers versus X and Y, Z generation, more influenced by the Great Depression. These generations have no memory of lack. Now, some of the X generation in the room, you might have had it a bit tough. Like you know, you might have had to share a computer with a sibling growing up, or you had one car parked in the driveway, but nothing like the generations before you. They truly understood scarcity and lack. Matures and boomers would link happiness to the outcome. I'll be happy when. I'll be happy when I get a bigger boat. I'll be happy when I get married. I'll be happy when I have kids. I'll be happy when they leave. Your generation, X, Y, and Z, are more concerned with what's making you happy today. So what am I doing today that makes me happy? This generation were motivated by fear. This generation is motivated by pleasure. And this is why when X generation came along, we didn't tolerate bullying in the workplace. Where this generation, bullying was kind of the way they grew up. This generation was, no, I'm not taking that. I'm not, and fear isn't a motivator for them, pleasure is. So even when Tony Robbins would say, you know, people do more to avoid fear than more to avoid pain and receive pleasure. He was right with these two generations, which is when he wrote that book. But X, Y, and Z generation don't respond to bullying, fear. It's just not a motivator for them. Technology resistant, technology savvy. But you're always gonna have I'm incredibly technical for a boomer, but I'm not the norm. My wife can't figure out how to get into a hotel room with a card, like, and it's, I mean, she literally, I giggle. Everything she tries, it's like it hates her. Like technology just hates her. But I'm an outlier when it comes to technology, but your generations are you know, very prominent on technology. So I'm gonna wrap it up there for this. Any questions, comments, challenges? Do you agree or disagree with anything I said?
I just want to add, and mention to Deanna, that we are also looking at the new generation, the generation alphas. Those would be the ones that are the kids of the millennials. And so if the millennials are tech savvy, they are tech savvier. But with the constitution, the work ethics of their grandparents, which could be the Gen X or the baby boomers. So their work ethics would be more like what we had before, so.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because most experts believe that our personality and our work ethic is ingrained in us by the time we turn 7 years old. That everything after 7 years old, it's hard to get it, the synaptic connections in our brain to, so most of our personality, our strengths and our weaknesses are all formed in the first 7 years of our life. The Alpha generation, interestingly enough, it missed a big part of schooling, doing remote work and masking and stuff like that, and the social cues. A lot of people don't know how that's gonna translate 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road, because every generation is identified by some form of a technology or something. So that generation missed 2 or 3 years of their life in the most critical time in forming the personality that they'll be for the rest of their life. So it'd be interesting to see what happens from that. Any other comments? So let me tell you where we're gonna go from here. You guys are gonna eat. I'll grab some at the end. I'll take it with me. I'm gonna take you on a journey on a book I wrote called Bring About What You Think About, and it is a completely different version of Eddie LeMoine. Like it's a much more inspirational look, but I'm telling you, you will get some stuff out of this next 45 minutes or so that you're gonna be able to use tomorrow when you go back to work, but you're also gonna be able to use it in your personal life. So why don't you grab your food, and I'll just take a break for a second, I'll change over my slides, and then you're gonna eat, I'm gonna keep working. Does that work? Okay.
Great.
Just save me a sandwich or something.
You guys got everything ready for Friday? Well, I can give a pitch, Jerry.
Yes. What kind of TV is that, Eddie?
What's that?
E-Link.
YEA E-Link, yeah. Who said that?
Oh, now this is off.
I'm gonna use those comments.
It was just flickering on and off.
This one?
No, the screen in behind here.
Oh.
I don't know why.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.